Right. Now, we are knee-deep in event season.
Yeah.
The Chamber Foundation has an event coming up, obviously sponsored by Walmart, and it's also on the topic of disasters.
Yeah.
So what can you tell me about this upcoming event this summer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've heard a lot the last, yesterday, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it today, but just how important planning, preparedness, playbooks are. And so we wanted to have a very similar conversation, but more tactical conversation. So we are hosting a working summit in Bentonville, Arkansas, in our brand new home office campus.
Nice, very nice.
June 23rd and 24th, and would love to extend an invite to folks who have been part of the conversation these last 2 days. Just really getting tactical on kind of where have there continued to be friction points across cross-sector collaboration. Where do we need to think about in this new operating landscape that we're in? How do we collaborate better? I really liked the comment yesterday by our keynote about the difference between collaboration versus coordination. And we really need to think about what does true collaboration look like, and how do we build those playbooks, and how do we, what do we need to solve for to really support resilience and preparedness at the local level?
So one of the questions and responses I heard yesterday was, well, when is a good time to start preparing for disasters? And one of the responses from one of our panelists yesterday was, right now.
Yeah.
So thinking about this event, why is the time necessary? Like, why now for this event?
Yeah. I think everyone is kind of grappling with what is this new operating model that we're working within. We're going to get the report from the FEMA Review Council this week, which may enlighten some of it. But I think, we've been saying for a long time, all disasters are local. But how do we really think about localizing the collaboration? And how do we also bring in new actors to the conversation? I think that's a big focus for us as we think about our convening in Bentonville. How do we bring different suppliers that are not usually part of this conversation, expand the network of the private sector thinking about resilience, and what does the collaboration look like with local emergency management?
Got it. So if I'm a small business, if I'm an attendee right now, and I want to come to this summit, what would I gain from it? What will I get out of it?
It's really focusing on kind of what partnership improvements look like. Our hope is that after the summit, we will have a playbook that will be published and shared with the attendees, but it's also an opportunity to contribute to that conversation and help us think through what is the roadmap forward and how do we make improvements that way.
Got it. Now, we talked about the what. So now the who. So who should be there? Like what groups of folks should be there?
Absolutely. Definitely emergency management, definitely organizations working in communities to support disaster response, and business. I think business is a critical part of the solution, and so we're thinking about what additional businesses need to be in the room, who's probably contributing but not part of these conversations, but I think a very similar cross-section that we have at today's conference.
Got it. Well, thank you for teasing out this event and also, again, for being here. We appreciate it. And we did it. We successfully got ready to start today's event. So we've got to get day 2 started.
Welcome to the podium, Rob Glenn from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's 2026 Building Resilience Conference. I'm grateful for the support that all of you have provided over the last couple of days as we shift towards thinking about the next generation needs from us now. Before we begin, I just want to recognize Will Powell, who has been instrumental behind the scenes of not only just this conference, but pretty much every conference since I've been here, and some before I actually got here. Will's actually departing, going back to grad school. And as we were thinking about the theme of the conference, but also wanting to recognize Will for his ingenuity and his service, I just wanted to publicly say thanks, Will. Dear Will, we think you're kind of a big deal. And Will's been working on a project using AI and actually taking the resilience in a box out of the box and making it much more accessible for small businesses. So Will, I know that we're going to be building on the things that you've built, and that's a solution for all of us potentially to help small businesses in the future. So thank you. And what some of you may appreciate is that Will is not an emergency manager. I'm an emergency manager, and he kind of got the crash course in emergency management with the series of disasters that we've had. And he also manages a lot of what you've seen on the front screens in terms of keeping track of the corporate aid coming from the private sector for global disasters and those here across the United States as well. So that's really instrumental in helping all of us understand the complexity of disasters and also what is being done to meet needs. So also in terms of thank you, I want to also thank our presenting sponsor, Verizon. Just as a reminder, the van's still outside. Hopefully you can bring an umbrella and dodge the rain. Our leadership sponsors, Walmart and UPS. Our influencer sponsors, Amazon, the Caterpillar Foundation, Procter & Gamble, and FedEx. Our geospatial sponsor, Esri, and also our emergency management sponsors, EM1, IEM, and Pratis. We're thankful for the investment in this work and helping turn ideas into action. Now, again, quick safety message. I think I shared some of this yesterday, but it's always good to note the nearest exit. At the Chamber, we do maintain a comprehensive approach to event safety, and as you experienced on the way in, the screening and our dedicated security team present throughout the day. In the unlikely event that you may need to evacuate, you will be directed to shelter in place depending upon the situation. So please take a moment now to note your nearest exit, as our priority is a safe and secure event for everyone. Now to day 2. So day 1 really focused on the reality of our communities and the challenges that they're facing. We're going to talk today about global risk, emerging technology, resilient design, and next generation leadership. And we'll close with a session at the AIA Global Campus, because resilience really isn't something that is just a conversation, it's something you build. I'd like to frame this day with something that I read a long time ago, and if you could just bear with me, it's from a novel called Life and Fate. And this is written by a Russian who experienced the horrors of World War II and saw what happened to his country. He said, "Man never understands that the cities he's built are not an integral part of nature. If he wants to defend his culture from wolves and snowstorms, he must keep his broom, spade, and rifle always at hand. If he goes to sleep, then everything's lost." So as we're thinking about the challenges of the day, we really need to think about how we are vigilant in understanding our risk, both here and abroad. What should we be doing about it? And also the broom in this quote, the maintenance, the hard work, the things that are not on stage, the things that are done out in the field, to really invest in our next generation. So with that, let's get started for day 2. Thank you for being here.
Welcome to the stage, Jean Benincasa Thorpe from Atlantic Council, Kyle Pfeiffer from Southern California Edison, Elton Parker from BCG, and Tom Warwick from the Atlantic Council, in conversation with Melissa Mendizabal from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for day 2 of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's Building Resilience Conference. It's so good to see you all here. I have the pleasure of leading this first panel on day 2, so we're excited to bring some great energy to the room and kick off the day on a good start. Today's conversation is about something really important: how global conflict is reshaping the U.S. economic security landscape, and how businesses and the communities that they invest in and operate in are also affected. So in this 30-minute conversation, we'll hear from our illustrious panel on how these impacts flow from strategic decisions to operational challenges, and most importantly, some actionable ways to overcome them. So I'm joined by this great panel of guests. With me, I have Tom Warwick, from non-resident senior fellow from the Adrian Arsht National Security Resilience Initiative at the Atlantic Council; Elton Parker, partner and associate director, global leader of strategic risk from the Boston Consulting Group; Jean Benincasa Thorpe, who is non-resident fellow at the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security at the Atlantic Council and former Undersecretary of Homeland Security for Massachusetts; and Kyle Pfeiffer, all the way from California, Director of Business Resiliency from Southern California Edison. So thank you so much for joining us today. To get us started, I'd love to set the stage by asking a question to the group. Everyone's talking a lot about risks and different sorts of global risks that are involved in our landscape right now. But what do you think is the most underappreciated way global conflict is already showing up in the US business and community landscape?
I'll go first. I was the director of the Iran task force at the Department of Homeland Security from 2012 to 2018. And quite clearly, the war with Iran is having economic consequences that obviously affect businesses, governments, and private individuals. It's also making us think more urgently about what strategic resilience means in practice. And one of the takeaways I hope people take is there are steps that you can take to actually mitigate that risk, and you need to take them. And even though today we heard good news and bad news, there'll be more news probably by the time we get out of this session. But there really are concrete steps that everybody needs to take in order to address these new risks that are coming in almost on a daily basis.
I think to build on that, if I used one word to build on what Tom said, probably whiplash. Because if you follow a stock market ticket or the price of oil or things, it's not just the uncertainty, but it's the volatility and the speed with which this change happens. But I would also go back to the question of underappreciated by who, because the people at the end of that crack the whip appreciate it greatly because their prices or their vendors or their supply lines. So it might come all the way back to appreciating the impact that it's not just the current situation, it's still the existing impact from Russia, Ukraine, it's the potential of China, Taiwan, it's the Venezuela one, it's the Cuba one, it's a series of, so the cumulative effect, almost like a TBI, it's not just a single event, it's the accumulation of that. That might be the underappreciated, is it's going to stress test our ability to buffer and be resilient.
You know, I think it's really the cost of some of the ways in which we see global conflict manifest within businesses. So I've come back to my emergency management roots after spending a few years as the national security advisor for our company, Southern California Edison. And I'll tell you, on the cyber side, you know, we have to spend so much time and effort and money and capacity to ensure that both our IT and our OT are safe and secure from non-state actors and from capable state actors, that I think emergency managers sometimes maybe underappreciate the investment that some companies, and hopefully as well state and local governments, need to make to ensure that we have robust defenses in the cyber domain. So that's one thing I've been thinking quite a bit about.
So I think I'm playing that role from yesterday to bring it into today, because I'm taking it from the state and local perspective. I spent 5 years working with 2 different governors for Homeland Security, and my role there was to really take care of the communities. So for me to answer this question, it hit right away. It's the individuals in the communities that are impacted by this that are underappreciated, because it is the fuel costs, it is the food costs, it is the staples, it is the stress, the misinformation, the polarization that goes from a conflict into our communities. And that takes place in workplaces, it takes place in schools, public spaces. And what does that do? It strains the emergency public safety of our community. It strains the healthcare centers of our communities. It strains the school systems. So if, you know, for me to take my years of experience of what global conflict, what pandemic conflict, what disaster conflict happened, it's the roots of the communities that are really, I feel like, underappreciated, but also the biggest impact. And again, we're going to hear, and I heard it all day yesterday, which was terrific, about how do we get resilient. But you know, when it hits the businesses, it hits the people, and there's no way around that. So that is sort of my, my importance is to, if I can keep people resilient, I can keep communities resilient, and I can help the state to become resilient. So that is where I take this.
And I think we can definitely appreciate that at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, since we're all about building stronger communities. So Tom, I want to go back to you, since in your opening statement you mentioned lessons learned from the Iran conflict. So I was hoping you could dive a little bit deeper into that. What are some takeaways right now, these early lessons we can see with the conflict, that we can learn and transfer to other lessons and other challenges for how companies should be thinking about resilience and risk today?
Melissa, having worked in this area for as long as I have, I would have everyone write down the following notes. Number one, the idea that this is going to end in a peace deal that brings everything back to normal is very low. It's much more likely we're going to end up in a Cold War situation in which there may be reduced military hostilities. There could be more, but even if there are reduced military hostilities, the political settlement won't be there. The possibility of further military action is going to be real. It may not be for a few months, but everyone needs to prepare for more disruptions and to be able to hedge against risk, whether it's oil supply, oil prices, whether it's supply chain disruptions. These kinds of things are going to be real, and we're going to see a lot more of them. The second thing is that people are going to need to make sure you've got folks following the news. One of the characteristics of how Iran has done things, even though they're great believers in what we call asymmetric warfare, they have a symmetry in how they do things. And so businesses should watch whatever we do to the Iranians, they will try to do to us in some symmetrical way. And this is going to include everything from cyber attacks, if they get subject to cyber attacks, attacks on critical infrastructure if they get attacks on their critical infrastructure. And it is almost predictable how they respond, and businesses have to pay attention at a detailed level, because the way the Iranians see things done to them, they want to do to us. And that's going to target US officials, it's going to target businesses that are perceived as supporting the state of Israel, or even people who are just in some tangential way involved in things they don't like.
So then how do we bring that back to business, and how businesses can use this perhaps future of uncertainty, which I think is something that's not unique to this conflict alone, in order to better prepare?
Yeah, so on the economic side, oil prices affect almost every business. Supply chains are at risk for almost every business. Where you get your supply chain could be affected by what goes on in the Gulf and through trade disruptions. And you're actually having to worry not just about your inputs, but the input to somebody else's inputs that you were buying from. If you were buying from India or China and they don't have oil, that's going to affect what they're able to do business with you. So the second and third order consequences have to now be managed as part of the risk portfolio. Secondarily is they can do things against us here in the United States. When I was at DHS, we had elaborate plans for how to address many of these risks, but we all knew that many of the risks to the homeland fall on the private sector. And the private sector has to be prepared to resist the kinds of things that Iran could do to us. And quite often that's because we or some ally of ours did the exact same thing to them, and you have to go keep track of this almost on a daily basis. I can give you 100 examples, but it suffices to say this really has to be part of the risk management strategy of every business in the country.
And you mentioned supply chains. I think if I had $1 for every time I've heard that word in the past month, I'd be a rich person. So I'd love to turn to Kyle to talk about that very topic. So from the business side of things, when the geopolitical picture shifts super quickly, it's really hard for businesses to hedge their bets. What are some practical steps that companies can take to assess exposure, build continuity, especially considering supply chain constraints?
Sure. Well, I think we could spend the next 20 minutes on this, but I'll try to do it in just one. So I'll share two things. One, we really focus on understanding our suppliers, and I like to think of suppliers in three ways: dominant, malicious, and compromised. And so dominant suppliers have a significant portion of the market share, particularly for us where we have large engineered structures that maybe have long lead times. We don't have a lot of choice. There's not a lot of diversity for things like large power transformers that can take years to come through production and be ready to bring onto the grid. When we talk about malicious suppliers, those are ones that are maybe white labeling products, are putting in backdoors to execute cyber attacks, to steal data, et cetera. And then there's the compromised ones. And those are perhaps the most dangerous, because those are ones that provide sort of a veil of security and maybe don't necessarily know that they're sort of being a useful pawn for bad actors. And that's a challenge we have a lot. Previously, I was a director of the Energy Threat Analysis Center at DOE, which is a public-private partnership between the electric power industry and increasingly natural gas and oil and government intel analysts. And one of the things that we released a report on was on white-labeled cameras that were used across not only the utility sector, but in businesses and in homes. And I just bought a new home, and I found one of those white-labeled cameras in my home and had to pull it out along with TP-Link routers. And so, it's very important that you have some sort of framework to assess suppliers, but at the same time, sometimes you have to make a risk management decision for things where they are a dominant supplier, that's all they have. So how do you build a fence or a moat or a perimeter around the products that you need for your business to continue to operate? And that's something we struggle with in the electric sector on a daily basis.
I think a lot of that is also thinking beyond the first order effects down to second and third. I see Elton smiling when I say that, because that's been a topic of our conversation and a lot of the work we've done together. So Elton, how would you get companies to start thinking a little bit more about those second and third order effects, and maybe those uncertain ones as well?
I think part of it is embracing that your ability to predict is not nearly as good as you believe it to be. Admitting that you might be wrong, admitting that there's a need for a plan B or a plan C. And so you do that by purposely envisioning different scenarios or plot lines playing out. You know, it's not just most likely or most dangerous, and then everything else is a lesser included, but envision some positive scenarios as well. You know, what did it take to achieve this outcome or increase this resilience or, you know, leap ahead in the technology? So seeing risk as an opportunity, not just a play defense and mitigate and react. So doing contingency planning, doing different scenarios, doing war games, doing tabletops, it takes the original hypotheses and then purposely stress test it and say, where do we have a blind spot? Where do we have a key dependency on what we believe is not just a dominant, but a dependable supplier or vendor? Where do I have redundancy built in? Where do I have backups? So purposely engaging in a test, fail fast, learn faster type of mindset embraces that, okay, we purposely broke this, and here was the warning sign of that breaking, and then you end up turning that right back around into your next set of plans and policies. So I think it's committing to that. We're not as prescient as we think we are. We do need a plan B and maybe a C, and there are others that can help in this. So it's not just go it alone or that we'll always be bailed out. So I think it's changing how we think, not just what to think in many of these.
Yeah, and I think the whole uncertainty elements, challenging assumptions is a really key factor. Kyle, I think from the business perspective, you have a lot of that experience. So what is something in the theme of not making assumptions, trying to ascertain what those uncertain effects are, what's one vulnerability companies consistently underestimate beyond their suppliers?
Well, I talked about the cyber risk already, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about the sheer volume of, you know, there's a theme of partnerships yesterday, and I'll be honest, sometimes it feels a little hackneyed, and it feels like this is the least common thing we can talk about. But I'll tell you, I'm new to the role as the Director of Business Resilience at SCE. In our service territory, we have several FIFA games, including 2 Iran games. So seeing the FIFA presentation yesterday was excellent. We have a Super Bowl coming up in 2027, and then I have LA 28 Olympics, all in the next 3 years. So I'm not going to be very busy. Yeah, just a few things. And of course, we're earthquake country. It's wildfire season, 365 days a year, and I have 15 million customers across 15 counties. Right, so busy job, and new to Southern California. And so sometimes it feels like, hey, I've made these connections. I'm well established in Massachusetts. I know everyone. But keep in mind, there's always new folks coming in, and as a new person to the Southern California region, I'm having to make a very concerted effort to go out and shake hands with folks who have been there for 15 or 20 years, or for folks who are coming into the community and are just going to be there for FIFA or for LA 28 and then move on. But it's going to be a critical transient partnership. And so, sometimes, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say this, you can throw me out of the conference, but sometimes I hear people talk about partnerships and I say, oh geez, come on, like we know this, but it really is quite important and something I think a lot about.
Yeah, I think we're in for a nice turn of events with all the sporting events and the like, and a lot of lessons learned for how we should prepare for those. And speaking of lessons learned, Jean, I know Atlantic Council has a new report called Resilience First, which really factors in a lot of lessons learned and takeaways for business and how companies can kind of operate. So can you share with us some of the main takeaways from it? What are things that will make us dive a little bit deeper into that report and lessons learned that we can take away from it?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for bringing up the partnerships, because that's my whole role here. But I had the opportunity to work with the Atlantic Council for 18 months. They brought a group of leaders, stakeholders, from all areas of government and private sector together to really dig deep into what is resiliency. I mean, we took definitions, we broke it down to the cinemas. I go, what is resilience? It's different for everybody. We finally came up with the definition, and then I think at that point they realized that, wow, it starts with individuals and it goes to communities. We don't have anybody on the task force representing that. There I go, jump on again like this panel. But it really comes down to, they came up with 3 components for global conflict, or any conflict, which is the speed of disruption, which we all noticed what was going on here, the exposure to our digital backbone, which hit everybody, and the interdependencies of our systems. You can't dispute that because it all laid out in this Iran conflict, all of it. So the Atlantic Council that put this paper out last year in June really thought about what to think and predict and perform and prepare for from that report. And it really does come down to the relationships, because we can say this yesterday and today, and I heard about some great executive committees coming together, but if the businesses don't plug in to their state partners, which they all rely on the same systems to do their work, then there's always going to be a silo. And I think the Atlantic Council was really good at defining what those interdependent systems looked like and what the impact of the silo was. And we knew that right away from the impact on the community, right? So, coming from that report, and I really put a lot of emphasis on the partnership. And you'll hear it again towards the end of this panel, because it is a solution, and it doesn't have to be a difficult way to get there, but it played out in COVID. It played out through our states in COVID, where we had a robust coordination with the private and public sector every day for 2 years to get information to and from, to put out critical data, to get best practices, to get that pandemic mitigated. So we know it works, and the Atlantic Council proved it with many cases that it went through. And as a sort of community resilient subject matter expert up here, from my just being part of it, it is the partnerships. And if the Atlantic Council could do any really proactive work, it was defining that in their paper.
So partnerships, breaking down silos, building relationships, public-private sector coordination, all things that are really important, both in the report, things I hear a lot in the work I do. So how does a company go about that? How do we build these relationships with communities and actually start breaking down those silos?
Well, right away, there's partnerships that already exist. So the fusion centers in every state has a public-private program. And they do the briefings, the cyber intel, the sector-specific threat environment assessments for any company that plugs in. And it's very simple. It's either going through your state police or going through your fusion director. We in Massachusetts, I had several sectors that I was briefing to on a monthly basis. Healthcare, education, I had cyber, I had small businesses, I had large businesses that would come in on a monthly basis and get these assessments from the Fusion Center. And right away, they got to see what the landscape looked like and what we were doing as a state and what we were doing to, what sort of sectors we were looking at, mapping our threats. The businesses were able to take that back to their own businesses and map that out. And they constantly were in contact with us. We didn't have all the businesses in Massachusetts, and that's what, my really mission was, to get everybody plugged in, because I saw the benefits. Mm-hmm. So that's it. That's one of the easiest steps for the businesses to do right now, is to plug into the Fusion Center. They are your heartbeat for public safety and your threat assessments for your state, and they really do want your input, because again, we talked about that, interdependency systems. So if your system's down, our system's usually down. So to get that information to you, so you can go to your businesses and do the right mapping, the right risk mitigation, is only going to help the state.
So I'm hearing that communication, and maybe even communication pre-crisis, is really what stands out as a difference maker. Elton, I know in a lot of the work we've done together with our strategic simulations and wargaming, that's actually a big lesson learned. So from a lot of your wargaming work with BCG, how can we go about really strengthening the communication pre-crisis, and why is that so important?
I think when we work with organizations in the heat of the moment, whether it's in an emergency operations center or crisis center or whatever, people say, what do we know? What do we need to know? When do we need to know it? And they stop, and sometimes we try to force them to say a fourth question of, are the right people in the room? Mm-hmm. Because somebody has that key piece of information, that final piece of the puzzle. But if we haven't shared the box top with them, the common operating picture, to know that they are a key portion of that this matters to them and that they matter to somebody else. So opening that aperture and bringing people in, If, not to, there are 1,000 definitions of resilience, but if we add anticipate in there and not just react to it, if we try to emerge not just to survive the disruption, but to thrive coming out the other side of it, reimagine the business and the community in altered circumstances, you do that by expanding that aperture of, all right, the usual suspects, but second, third order layer, the businesses, the business dependencies, the vendors, extended enterprise risk. So I'm not saying it has to be everybody, but you will reach a larger awareness and center of mass by bringing other people in, and they will bring their experience and their needs in as well.
And to me, it seems like a key component of that is being able to value risk and embrace it. So for perhaps companies that are maybe a little bit newer to embracing risk, how can we get more into the foresight mindset?
So risk, particularly in English, is literally and figuratively a four-letter word. So you believe that it's only can be mitigated, buy down, transfer, avoid. That's the typical aspect. But if ISO defines it as the effect of uncertainty on objectives, we attach that negative connotation to it. So if you can start to see that, do I get a first move advantage? Can I leap ahead in a technology? Can I lobby for a regulatory change? Can I form a new partnership? Can I be the disruptor and make the market react to me? Certainly there are disruptions that occur outside your ability to influence and control, but if you start seeing that because of this, work from home shifted, or relaxations, that the answer was, well, we can't do that because we've never done that before. Well, this is, whether it's a new normal or a new normal or a return to the old new normal, there's the opportunity in that disruption. And again, walking them through situations where they go, wow, I didn't think that I could do this or I could embrace that. So it is never prediction, but anticipating surprise and embracing risk so you can harness uncertainty instead of just wait for it and have a plan to react. It's maybe you can shape or influence that disruption in the first place.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that was very good. But again, going back to the partnership, you're going to get that information from your partners. So it is that important because and I think that was well said in that, in order for you to mitigate your own risk, you got to know the full scope of the risk. And how do you know that? It's plugging into your states, it's plugging into your communities. That is how we're going to really achieve resiliency. And and I know you've heard this all yesterday, and you'll hear it. You're going to continue to hear it. But the public-private partnership is how we're going to mitigate the threats of today. How we dealt with it yesterday is not going to get us forward. So, and this is a positive thing. This is a positive thing because these programs exist for you to plug into. We don't have to develop it. We just plug you in, and then you get these analyses and these threat scopes and these cyber briefings that really are of today and what's happening in your community, in your state, in your country.
Can I foot stomp on that? I mean, we didn't coordinate this ahead of time, but the fusion centers are phenomenal. I mean, the concept, whether it's information sharing architecture, whether it's that mindset, but it is not that you're just a recipient. You are a contributor. You're a provider. As we go from raw data to information and information to actionable intelligence, you all are key providers and purveyors and consumers of that. And I can't advocate enough for that information sharing. I mean, information management for us is the lifeblood of emergency management. So if you're a part of that, not just the consumer of it, then you speed up that information sharing loop. Can't advocate enough for that.
So kind of answered my next question, which was really about when we look at public-private sector coordination, what does good look like? And so I'd ask the rest of the panel to jump in with either what does good look like from your purview, or what happens when it breaks down and what breaks down most often?
I think the electric sector offers a really great model. So, we avail ourselves of fusion centers. We have direct relationships with Intel offices, with our sector risk management agency at Department of Energy, but we also share information peer-to-peer through different forums, some official, some less than official. And we work with the Electricity Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the EISAC. And I think about where that stems from, and I really think it comes from CEO leadership. So there's the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council, which is the only CEO-led sector coordinating council of the various and sundry SCCs that exist under DHS, or maybe used to exist under DHS in some cases. And I think that CEO leadership and commitment to security really just sort of has flown been able to flow down throughout the electric sector, and you sort of see the fruits of that 10 to 15 years later. I don't know that we necessarily reflect enough on how much work was done to stand that up and to get that commitment, nor now do we maybe almost take for granted the fact that we have CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and of public power entities and co-ops coming together on a routine basis with VPs to talk about security issues. So I think, once again, the electric sector is a great place to look for not only government to industry coordination, but industry coordination amongst ourselves.
And let me turn this back to national security challenges, one of the subjects of this panel. This is really something that is going to have to be addressed differently from the way we thought we were doing this over the last 50 years. One of the things, whether it's the Iran crisis, whether it's the crisis that could come with China, which I can bet with all of these future experts up here, 99.99% of American businesses are not ready for what a China conflict could do to them. Even an Iran conflict is much more difficult to manage this year than anybody would have thought. And I want everyone to take away from this panel and the important point that the federal government is not going to be there for you in the way it was in the past, whether that's in emergency management, whether it's understanding the consequences of national security challenges, wars, other kinds of disruptions. You aren't going to be able to rely on the federal government the way it used to be. The policy, certainly of this administration, but it will probably continue, is that the private sector is on its own. State and local governments are going to have to take over more responsibilities that used to be in the federal government. But if the federal money is not there, everybody here knows it takes states, 3 years to come up with the budget cycle and the revenue base, because they have to have balanced budgets, to replicate what the federal government used to do for you. And this means states are not going to have the resources. This is going to put the burden on the private sector to pick up some of the understanding of the challenges, what are the first and the second order consequences of these national security challenges. If you don't have a plan as a business for understanding what war with Iran does to your business strategies and your budgets, you need one. If you don't have a plan for China, if you don't have a plan, I can go down a list of 5 or 6 things that ought to be now in every risk manager's portfolio so that you can explain to your executives, we are ready if this kind of a crisis happens. This year it's Iran, and as we said when I was in the State Department, sometimes you have to shoot the wolf nearest the sled. And so this kind of a challenge has got to be part of what everybody now does. You are much more on your own now than you have been throughout most of the professional lives of everyone in this room.
And speaking of making plans for the future, as we wrap up this panel, I'd like to ask everyone, one quick takeaway question that the audience can leave with something a little bit actionable. So if you had to prioritize just one investment, whether a capability, relationship system that most strengthens economic security at a state, company, regional level, what would it be and why? Or maybe what would it be, since we're a little short on time?
Get ready for what's coming this year, and you need to be ready for next year's crisis this year, not next year.
Move from a need to know to need to share on information.
Paying attention to risk and really thinking about how it impacts not only customers, but share prices and cost of capital.
Again, plugging into your state partnership. If we could do one thing, and I learned it at the Atlantic Council, was to create a resiliency hub for all sectors to come together, share this information. It works. It's been proven. I've told you earlier today that we did it for COVID and it worked. This is how we're going to mitigate these risks going forward, is plugging into the systems, working together with your local, with your community, with your state.
Well, I'll add my 2 cents in that we should be embracing risk and viewing it not only as something negative, but actually embracing the positive outcomes that can come from it. So thank you so much to this great panel. Really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you to our audience for joining us today.
Thanks.
Welcome to the stage representatives from the National Civics Bee, Cameron Parker from Colorado and Juniper Ward from Oregon, in conversation with Hillary Crow from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. Not to brag, but I may have the coolest panel of the entire conference up here right now. I'm Hillary Crow, Vice President of Civics here at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and I'm really delighted to lead this conversation today. And I have to give a thank you to my colleague Rob Glenn for having the idea to invite these incredible students to participate in this conversation. So as the head of civics here at the foundation, I lead the Civic Trust, and our work really focuses on improving civic knowledge and participation in communities all across the country. And really importantly, making sure that people of all ages have meaningful and real opportunities to contribute to solving problems in their neighborhoods. And one way we do that is through the National Civics Bee, which is a nationwide competition that invites middle school students to think about issues in their community and how they could solve them and address them through civics. So thinking about how communities work, how decisions are made, and how people can really drive change together. So these two students up here with me today, Cameron Parker from Colorado and Juniper Ward from Oregon, were state winners of the 2025 National Civics Bee. And I love that they both, even though it was a civics competition, wrote essays about resilience-related issues. So Cameron wrote about the need for safety alerts during times of crisis and disruption. And Juniper wrote about environmental risks and how to better protect communities. So I'm excited to dive in. First question, whenever we tell somebody that we are hosting a resilience conference, they ask, well, what do you mean by resilience? How do you define resilience? So I would love to hear from your perspectives, what does resilience mean to you? What does it look like in your communities, particularly when something difficult or unexpected happens? Cameron, I'll ask you to go first.
When I think of resilience, especially in communities, I think of the connections that you build with other community members, especially when there's a common issue that your entire community faces. You can see family, friends, even strangers can help each other for the benefit of the community. So, for example, there were the Texas floods in Texas. You could see people from the community coming together to help each other lift sandbags and protect their businesses and their homes. I think the sandbags are a good representation of an individual struggle, so you can help the community overall. It's incredibly vital that we learn how to participate in our communities and how to help others so we can further the future of America.
Awesome. Juniper, what about you?
I think so to me, I think resilience means coming together as a community to understand the risks that will come with adversity, and then also coming together after the fact, being kind, and helping each other rebuild. I think I'm really lucky to live in a community that cares about taking care of both people and the environment. Some ways I have seen resilience in my community is how my city has been rebuilding and updating local schools and bridges to prepare them for an earthquake that is expected to happen within the next 50 years, as well as preserving the natural areas around rivers and streams to minimize the impacts from flooding.
Wonderful. So Cameron, I want to turn to you. I mentioned this a little bit already, but the issue that you wrote about to enter the National Civics Bee was around improving evacuation alerts during natural disasters. How did that idea come to you? What was the sort of challenge that you saw in your community, and what made you realize that you wanted to do something about it?
In my Colorado community in 2021, we were affected by the Colorado Marshall fires, and it affected thousands of people, burned down hundreds of homes. And as thousands of people were being evacuated, I noticed that not everyone got the evacuation alerts. In fact, thousands of people didn't, including my dad. And I saw that as an incredibly hard problem to solve, but incredibly vital, because alerts are a matter of life and death. So in order to ensure that everyone has the right to life, we need to make sure that everyone, no matter what, can get evacuation alerts. So I thought, how could I solve that problem? So I thought, and one of the major things that I thought about is that evacuation alerts are needed across the country so that everyone, no matter what, can have access to evacuation alerts and can be safe to protect their family, their friends, their loved ones, even their pets. Thank you.
And Juniper, you wrote about reducing environmental risks while protecting communities and ecosystems. What was the gap or the issue that you were trying to address?
So I was specifically focusing on river pollution in the Willamette River. I grew up very close to this river, and protecting it is something I care deeply about. This river runs through my community as well as many others in Oregon, and these cities get their water from this river, but are also major contributors to the pollution itself. From millions of gallons of sewage that overflows into the river every year due to outdated sewage systems that are susceptible to flooding, and the huge amount of trash that gets swept into the river every year. These issues exist primarily due to a funding gap. Portland, Oregon recently redid their sewage systems to prevent major sewage system overflows, which cost them over $1.4 billion, which is just something other cities can't really provide for. And another thing is that although preventing flooding does help build resilient communities, the dams to prevent flooding as well as hydropower dams are extremely detrimental to the river environment, especially native salmon.
Wow. I have a middle schooler and a high schooler at home, and they're not quite thinking about these types of issues yet and how to be problem solvers. So I just applaud you for identifying these issues and how you can help strengthen your communities. So both of you have been thinking beyond just identifying the problem, but what could we do about it, right? How could we improve it? So as you've looked at implementing solutions, what barriers have you come across or do you expect to run into? And what sort of support could make the biggest difference? Cameron?
The biggest problem for me is that I want to make this app so that we can create an evacuation alert solution for everyone in the country, no matter what. And I think a big problem with that is that in every district and in every state, there are slightly different rules about evacuation alerts. And so that means that to create a cohesive app for everyone in America, it would have to accommodate all these different legislative changes between states and regions. So I identified either we would have to make this solution federal, or it would be a private institution supported by the public government. So I decided that my solution would be an app that would get evacuation alerts to anyone who had it on their phones, and it would be a nonprofit private institution, but it would be supported by the federal government. So the big challenge there is that with a private institution, it means that funding isn't always guaranteed. It can't be in a federal budget. So we would need to get support from the federal government and other nonprofit institutions so that we could support the app and ensure that everyone in America gets evacuation alerts and can save themselves.
Wow, that's fantastic. Juniper, what about you?
A barrier I've personally run into with this project is that since I'm a kid, I don't really have the time to work with people whose entire work hours are during when I'm in school. Another big issue with my problem is that has been funding. Like I mentioned earlier, it takes a lot of money to update sewage systems, and trash cleanup days take a lot of resources as well. Another huge problem with this is people also don't know about this issue or realize how drastic it is. Financial support in terms of working with local and state governments to help fund sewage system improvements, as well as increasing public awareness on this issue so more people know about it and more people care, and then promoting the use of other sources of renewable energy so we can move away from using the very old hydropower dams is the kind of support that would help most for my project.
And so I think one of the reasons why this conversation is really important is it challenges the assumptions about who belongs in these conversations and who has ideas to share about how to make improvements in our communities. What role do you think that young people have to play in community preparedness, resilience, and what are you already seeing young people do? Juniper?
I think that young people have a really important role in educating themselves on issues related to resilience. Part of my project relating to the dams is to have elementary students write letters to the dam owners with innovative solutions to the problem to show them that kids care about this. And I have seen young people participating in resilience as part of my high school green club by planting native plants and beach cleanups. I also recently worked with other high school students to learn about wind energy off the Oregon coast and then presented the trade-offs to the Oregon Offshore Wind Roundtable. And then when I came to the National Civics Bee here last year, I also met many other kids who had innovative solutions to help build their community's strength.
That's fantastic. Cameron, what about you?
First of all, young people are crucial to our communities. They're the future of America, and as they become more active citizens in their community, they should be learning how to apply learning and actions to help their community. So part of my project was that we should get everyone involved so that everyone can be protected by evacuation alerts, and that includes young people. So I think that one of the main things that we can do to help young people is to provide them with the resources that they need to provide their ideas to the community. Something that helped me a lot during the National Civics Bee was my social studies teacher, Ryan Conrad. He helped me through the National Civics Bee and inspired me to do the best that I could, which led me to be here speaking at this conference. And I have a lot to be thankful for, including him. So I think that all young people should have someone in their life that could provide the same help and the same resources that they need to provide their ideas to the community. And I think that's where schools and the government and businesses and volunteers can come in to help their community, is to provide young people with the assistance and the learning that they have so that we can provide the future of America, the future of America, the greatness that we've already seen in our past generations. Thank you.
Wow. I think one of the greatest rewards of getting to be part of our civics work and the National Civics Bee in particular is just seeing these young people that are so inspiring, so motivating. They give us a lot of hope for the future, and I love to hear that you're seeing that across your peers in your communities as well, and not just that you're future leaders, but that you can help lead right now, and you can be part of positive change. It's amazing. So I want to close our conversation by connecting your ideas with today's audience. So how can business leaders or nonprofits, educators, government help bring youth-led ideas to action? You talked about this a little bit already in the last question, but are there additional things that you would say to the audience that's here today, the way that they can help support ideas of young people in their communities when they go back to the cities and states they've traveled here from, and to carry these messages back to them? Cameron?
I have seen, I've already seen young people like writing letters to Congress to provide their ideas. I mean, even when they contribute in their communities, it can be something like writing a letter to Congress. It can be even walking like their grandma across the street, and I see that every day. And I think young people have the ideas, and they have the plans, and they have the grit and determination to make that idea a reality. Now, what nonprofits and businesses can offer to help young people is the resources, and it could be money, it could be people, so that they can make their ideas a reality. I think that's where everyone should come in to help the new generation of America, so that we can provide them with what they need to become new members of communities all across the United States.
Juniper?
I think that a way you can help kids like me who have innovative solutions is by offering your expertise, especially around their project areas, or help them navigate the government and business world to help them secure funding for their projects. You can also offer things like incentives or travel stipends while working with other community organizations to get more kids interested in creating innovative solutions and it more equitable to everyone.
Excellent. Well, if you have never been to a National Civics Bee competition, wherever you live, there's one happening in your state this year. So I would encourage you to find and go and be inspired, and you will meet many more young people just like Cameron and Juniper that have incredible ideas. And maybe you could mentor them, or maybe you could think about how to bring their ideas into work that you are already doing. And we'll be hosting our next national championship here in this room in a few months, and we'll be sure that you all are invited to come. But I think what you've both shared today really reinforces what we see again and again through the National Civics Bee, which is that when you invite young people into real civic-minded problems, they can really rise to the occasion and bring some innovative solutions. So thank you both for being here and for sharing your insights with us today.
Welcome to the stage, Dan Kanuski of North Star Risk and Resilience.
The alarm sounds. We're called to respond to a house fire, a car accident, a heart attack. I would see the pain, the suffering, the loss. And in each of those situations, I would ask myself, why didn't we stop this from happening? That question motivated my career, from the White House all the way back to that fire station in Minnesota, and most recently as the first Deputy Administrator for Resilience at FEMA. There are disasters that we've all experienced, sometimes as a disaster survivor, sometimes as a responder. I argue that those disasters define who we are. For me, that was 9/11. Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Maria, the pandemic. And in each of those situations, I asked myself, were there lessons learned or simply observed? On 9/11, I found myself at the top of the US Capitol building, in the crosshairs of what would become the most catastrophic terrorist attack on US soil. I saw the smoke rising across the mall at the Pentagon. And as the smoke rose from the Pentagon, the brave souls aboard Flight 93 prevented me from becoming a victim of that terrorist attack. In the summer of 2005, I found myself in the White House. 3 weeks later, the most catastrophic disaster of our time struck. Hurricane Katrina killed thousands, costed hundreds of billions of dollars in losses. And in 2017, I joined FEMA, and Hurricane Maria came ashore just 3 days later. In 2020, I was at the first meeting of what was then called an emergency task force on the novel coronavirus. In each of those scenarios, we asked ourselves these questions. And in each of those scenarios, action followed disaster. After 9/11, counterterrorism funding exploded. New institutions like the US Department of Homeland Security were created because the threat felt immediate and visible. After Katrina, we asked ourselves why we weren't better prepared and why infrastructure wasn't more resilient. After COVID, we questioned why supply chains didn't flex under pressure. The largest grant program at FEMA is the Public Assistance Grant Program. That grant program, as you know, reimburses governments after disaster. But it does so regardless of whether that community ever invested in risk reduction. As someone with a background in insurance, I can tell you that no private insurer would underwrite to those terms. And we know that every $1 invested in hazard mitigation saves $6 when a disaster occurs. And we also know, thanks to the US Chamber and Allstate, that there's an additional 7-to-1 benefits because of the economic losses averted. That brings us to 13-to-1. And so then we say, those seem to be at odds. But I would argue the system isn't broken. It's actually operating as designed, just backwards. But this isn't FEMA's problem alone, nor is it any federal agency's issue to solve on their own. It takes all of us. After all, there's a whole ecosystem of public and private sector stakeholders, many of whom are in this room right now, that have a direct financial incentive to invest in risk reduction. And I argue if we can mobilize all these stakeholders, we can move the market. Consider the insurance industry or the finance and banking industry, all levels of government, the real estate industry. We could keep going on, but let's talk about this with a few examples. The insurance industry has a vested interest in seeing losses averted because that means fewer claims, fewer payouts. The finance industry, if you look at lenders don't want to see delinquencies. They certainly don't want to go into foreclosure. And governments have no interest in spending more money or resources that they don't have to spend. Think about everything from that local government. The 911 calls avoided because you're safe in your home, because your more resilient home is not experiencing a loss. You're safe. You don't need 911. You don't need to tie up first responders. Likewise, at the federal level, you're not going to require individual assistance because your home is still standing. So what can these stakeholders do to incentivize us to build resilience? Well, insurers could offer lower premiums, and it sounds easier than it actually is. Like, if you ask your insurer for a discount, they may ignore you. But if you say, I've reduced my risk, and I want you to reevaluate that risk, because I think it merits a reduction in premium. That would be a great conversation for you to have with your agent, your broker, or your insurer. But what could those lenders do? Those lenders who are avoiding their own losses, who are avoiding delinquencies and foreclosures. The lenders, if they wanted to give you a hand, if they wanted to incentivize you to do something that benefits you and them, they could offer you better mortgage terms. They could offer you low interest or no interest loans to help you upgrade your home because you both benefit from that. And of course, governments, we know FEMA has the BRIC program. That certainly can incentivize action, a federal grant. But so too can local governments and state governments. They have levers that they can pull too. And the bottom line is when this whole ecosystem, all of these co-beneficiaries, if we were able to mobilize them, those co-beneficiaries, to also be co-investors, then suddenly resilience becomes economically sustainable. Some of these are everyday decisions. Sometimes it's replacing a window or a door on your house and giving it just a beat and say, rather than put the lowest cost item to replacement item, maybe I should use this as an opportunity to upgrade. But oftentimes we need a nudge. And that nudge is best exemplified at a state level with the Strengthen Alabama Homes program. Alabama provides eligible homeowners $10,000 to upgrade their roof to the IBHS fortified standard. And they do that, the state does that because intuitively it makes sense. Let's make sure that our homeowners, that our residents are safe from disasters, because if they're safe, it means actually less of a burden on us at state response assets, but it's just good. It reduces disaster suffering. That's a good thing. It increases the economic opportunity, especially following a disaster when everything is in disarray. But did you know it can also, and this has been demonstrated, not just intuitively, but empirically, that it can reduce your insurance premiums up to 40%. It can increase your resale value up to 7%. And after the storm, your house will stand and your neighbors might not. And that's just one example. Think of others. A homeowner with flood insurance, they recover 82% faster. A city with resilient building codes saves $11 for every $1 that community spends to upgrade their building code. And this isn't heroism, these are decisions. So what does that mean for the future? First, we need to move from a reactive stance to a proactive one. The federal government must evolve from simply cutting checks to being a proactive risk advisor, to being there for you before the disaster strikes, to advising these communities and these state governments on what the federal government has seen time and time again, which is that taking action before a disaster is better for everyone after a disaster. Second, close the protection gap. Far too few Americans have adequate insurance, and in some cases, any insurance, and no more is that more visible than with flood insurance. With flood insurance, where we have 90% of all natural disasters are flood-related, and yet a very, very small number of Americans have flood insurance. Related to that, the National Flood Insurance Program, say what you will about it, but that program offers flood insurance to anyone who asks for it. You can't be denied an NFIP policy. If you follow the rules, you get a flood policy. If your community invests in hazard mitigation, you get a flood policy. If your community goes above and beyond their mitigation measures, community resilience measures to reduce the impacts of flooding to that community, you get even lower flood insurance premiums. And so NFIP is a critical part of the solution, despite what anybody says about it, even me. Just like FEMA, NFIP needs to be reformed. I get it. But NFIP is an incredibly important and essential program. That said, we need to fully close this protection gap. We're going to need innovative solutions like parametric insurance. We're going to need private flood, meaning private insurers need to further provide insurance to the market. And three, like you just heard in the last session, we need to invest in the next generation. We need the experts from all these other industries, from engineering and finance to community engagement, to step up and translate risk into action. Everyone in this room has an opportunity to give voice to resilience. You can advocate for reforms and innovative solutions. I mentioned parametric insurance. I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands, but I would bet parametric insurance is a relatively new or even foreign term to many in this audience. But we need to advocate for these things. Where are 3 areas that I've been advocating? 1, fix FEMA, don't fold it. I had the opportunity to testify last year before the House, and I said, FEMA, again, no surprise, this is what I said. I said, you know, FEMA needs to evolve into a proactive risk advisor, not just this post-disaster check writer. Reform, not elimination. Second, risk transfer and risk reduction are inextricably intertwined. You can't do one without the other. I mean, you can, but not well. And so what we need to do, like I said to the Department of Treasury, insurance preparedness and hazard mitigation are all essential. Only by reducing the financial and physical impacts can resilience be achieved. There is no silver bullet here. Notice the words, insurance, preparedness, hazard mitigation. All of them, not one of them. And finally, building codes save lives. We talk about how much building codes save money, but they save lives too. I think Florida is a wonderful example of what a state has done following a catastrophic disaster, in this case, the 1992 Hurricane Andrew example. Florida significantly strengthened its codes, arguably to the best codes in the country as a result of that, and now Florida is more resilient as a result. Those that fared best made small strategic decisions before the disaster struck. And I believe that resilience is a destination, but it's mostly a direction. We can have a goal of saying we will all be resilient, our nation will be resilient. That's an admirable goal. But the reality is, we should be more focused directionally, because we're never going to get to 100%, even if that's our goal. So don't get deterred if you don't feel your resilience measures are making a difference. They are. They make a difference to you, your family, and your community. Most importantly, I feel like we should align on resilience as our collective North Star. It's the daily choice to understand risk, invest in mitigation, and to build to bend rather than break. The only question is, do we make those decisions now, or do we wait until the next disasters and have those decisions made for us? Thank you.
Welcome to the stage, Steve Casapula from Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, in conversation with Christopher Roberti from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
All right, good morning, everybody. Steve.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. You know, we were talking backstage. You've got a long and illustrious career in the U.S. government. You spent a lot of time at CISA back in the days, and we're over at ONCD, and then they tricked you and brought you back to CISA. So, but I think the organization is probably very lucky to have somebody who's has the depth and breadth of experience as you do. And you know, for many of us, you know, people know the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, but a lot of times we're thinking about the C, the cybersecurity part, and don't give enough thought to the I, the infrastructure part, which is really what underpins everything. And so I think, you know, if it would be helpful for you to give us some sense of the infrastructure work that CISA is doing, and a little bit about the threat picture that you see against critical infrastructure and how people in the audience should be thinking about it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and thanks for having me. It's great to see you all here. I see some familiar faces in the room, so thank you for not skipping this event when you saw me on the agenda. I appreciate that. I would just like to say, from a CISA standpoint, like Chris said, everybody thinks about the cyber piece. On the infrastructure side, we've just tried to hone in on everything is always interconnected. Whatever happens in the cyber world affects the physical piece. And so for us, when we look at the threat, when we look at the dynamic environment that we're in, when we look at the speed at which threat actors are moving, it's just rapidly changing all of the time. It's always accelerating, and we have to be prepared as best we can. And so with that, what I like to hone in on here is even if you have a cyber incident, what sort of physical aspects of your infrastructure or your facility might also be affected. And we have a lot of things on the infrastructure side that also have a cyber tail. And so we have drones flying over facilities now. We have insider threats who maybe start out as a cyber threat or a network threat, but then will cause physical harm or mess with the building's ventilation or things like that. And so the interconnectedness there is always at the front of my mind, and I really try to emphasize that as much as possible.
No, that's great. And I think, digging a little bit deeper on that one, there's a sub-organization within CISA, the National Risk Management Center, which again, some people know about, others don't. NRMC actually played a really important role during the COVID times in all the work that it had done thinking about critical infrastructure and where were critical dependencies and which industries and even workers were the most critical. So, are there things that NRMC is doing these days that is supporting sort of some of the newer threats that we're seeing?
Yeah, so I think, for us from an NRMC perspective, and just so you all know, in case you're not on CISA's website every single day, like a lot of folks in the media might be, I'm trying to rival Secretary Rubio in wearing as many hats as possible as I can in government. So in addition to our infrastructure security division, I'm also the acting for NRMC and the acting for our strategy, policy, and plans office. So from an NRMC perspective, we're trying to look at what other systems or what other attack vectors might come into play and how are those systems interconnected. So it's really easy to bucket that and say supply chain, third-party vendors, but the next part of that question should really be what sort of assurances are you getting when you enter into a contractual relationship with some of those vendors? What hard questions are you asking from folks both up and down your supply chain and asking how secure their systems are? We've all seen a number of instances and, unfortunately, national level attacks. The Change Healthcare one is one I frequently go back to where, that was something where it was on a few people's radar, but not on everyone's, that Change Healthcare could have this massive impact if they were breached. And everyone, I think, felt that pain a little bit. So I encourage everybody to look at some of those relationships that you're in and how you do business and the firms that you do business with, and ask them those tough questions too. How are they securing their networks? What sort of relationships do they have in place? What sort of controls do they have in place? How are they protecting you from someone in their organization who has the one admin password that can access all of your data too because they're networked in a certain way? So again, just pointing back to that and asking those tough questions, but then also I would encourage you to, make sure that's part of your contract or your agreement as well, so you can protect yourself and prepare for it.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point you made is that, risk, you might be in a vertical in an industry, but the risk can cut across industry and sectors horizontally. And so thinking through how is that working, and how are your supply chains being secured, because those suppliers may supply other industries as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So from threat and risk to resilience, let's talk a little bit about that. How are you at CISA defining resilience, right? So you've got a lot of, you might say, defense, you've got resilience, recovery, and maybe adversary behavior shaping or offensive activities. So for the people in the room, what does resilience mean from a CISA's perspective, and how are you engaging with the private sector and together with other partners in government?
Yeah, great question. I think, resilience to me is something that can be this overarching umbrella term, but it doesn't have to be so lofty and so complicated. So when you really break it down, it's how are you planning for when an incident happens? how far left of boom. I know that's not always an in vogue term, but to me that gets back to, it's not a question of if I'm going to suffer something or have an attack or have a breach or have an impact, it's when is it going to impact me? So how far left of boom can you plan for things? And when you're drawing up those plans, are you exercising them? Are you updating them? Are they flexible enough to understand the new contracts or new relationships that you're going to enter into? Is it a plan that just sits on a shelf and you dust off every once in a while and just sort of say, yeah, when something happens, we know to pull it off and we'll be fine? That should be something that hopefully folks are exercising all of the time, but that you're also updating. And then building in that resilience really means devoting resources and people to that left of boom scenario, so that how do we prepare and how do we make sure that we're always evaluating our risk. And so I think when we evaluate our risk and we talk about resilience, it's something that we can use to kind of start the conversation internally, but then also look at where we might need to partner or where we might need to ask for some help. And that's where, hopefully you turn to CISA or some of your other organizations, depending on what sector you're in, your sector risk management agency. But from CISA and our national coordinator role, we can really help prepare you and help fortify some of your plans. And I use that term fortify since yesterday we just launched CI Fortify. So if you're paying attention to the various blogs that are out there, or again, if you're on our website, like I know so many of you are every single day, pressing refresh and hoping to see all those good updates that come from CISA. Our CI Fortify program is really designed for critical infrastructure to have those conversations, to figure out what types of information you all might need, what kind of plans, how you can prepare for that stuff left of boom, and then who to ask for help, right? I don't expect everyone in this room to have all of the answers, but we can probably help with that. And so if there's certain things that you need, please get in touch and let us know, and we're happy to help.
Yeah, and I think two key, and thanks for raising CI Fortify. Two of the components are, isolate and recover, right? Is that right?
That's two of them, yeah.
Two of them, right. But I think it's having people think about a situation where you may need to disconnect your systems from a main connection and be able to still carry out some of your operations in a way that you're not fully shut down. And so I think that's, there's some industries where this is natural. Like I think in the electricity generation industry, there's a lot of thought on resilience and being able to run things manually and this kind of stuff. There's other industries where this may be less common. And so I think it's worth taking a look at the plan, engaging in it, having your people engage in it, and reaching out to CISA for additional support.
And I will just say, if I may, you hit on something there. When you're in a degraded state for whatever reason, or you have less capacity, that's something that I know you all deal with on a day-to-day basis, and a lot of times you plan for, whether it's network maintenance, whether it's taking equipment offline. So same thing, same approach, same mindset is what we kind of want folks to start thinking about. If you have an incident or you're attacked and you need to take some systems offline, are there still functions that you can perform? Are there still things that you can do? How are you going to communicate that with your customers and your stakeholders? So even in a degraded state, are there still things that you're able to accomplish or able to do as you bring those systems back online, as you restore from backups, right? All of those best practices that I'm sure you're getting off of our website, hint, hint. If you can still do a lot of those things, but you're in a degraded state, then maybe you just need to communicate that with and say, hey, this used to take us a week, now it's going to take 2. That's okay, but we're being as open and honest as we can with our customers and our stakeholders. We've asked for some help. We've brought in a third-party vendor, whatever it may be, going back to your plan. But we're trying to address it, and here's where we are right now until we get back to normal operating status.
So think ahead, plan ahead, and execute when needed.
Yeah.
So in our last couple minutes, I wanted to shift and talk a little bit about AI. Clearly, it's in the news a lot, but really, AI is not new. It's been around for decades. Its applications are increasing in scope and in speed. So how is CISA looking at AI from both as a tool and also as something to be able to plan for?
Yeah, so at CISA we've had a lot of conversations with a lot of the sector risk management agencies about how they can use AI in their own networks, in their own CIO shops, protecting the .gov, which is a core piece of CISA's mission, but then also how they can work with critical infrastructure owners and operators. And so, as you mentioned, it's been around for a while. Machine speed used to be the term of art, so to speak, is how quickly can we transfer information without a human in the loop. So a lot of those principles, I would say, still apply. We want to increase the speed at which we can share information with all of you so that you can absorb that information, ingest it, and use it to protect your own systems. We also want to make sure that we're building in the appropriate safeguards or making sure that there are still analysts in the loop who can check that work, do some audits, make sure you're getting the right value there, and then also understanding how attackers and threat actors are using AI to work much, much, much faster. And so some of the other things we're doing, AI can be a great tool for logging and other things like that. Some of those rote, sort of grunt type functions that happen when you're managing a network. And so we can do that a lot faster, hopefully with a lot fewer people, so that we can take those analysts and have them working more on the threat side and on the attack side instead of having to do just manual logging and things like that hopefully is not something we have to worry about too much anymore.
Mm-hmm. But yes, and so with the announcement of some of the new models that are out there, it's clear that the U.S. government is taking a whole of government approach in looking at how to safely and successfully implement and release these models. I think from our perspective, there is a tremendous potential for positive with the design, implementation, evolution, and integration of AI into everyday life. And it's good to hear that you and the government are of the same mind. The last thing I'll just ask you. So, looking ahead and just sort of dreaming, are there any kind of tools or capabilities that you would love to see or have in your hands now, or things that might be in process that could really change the way you do your work and support the nation?
Yeah, I mean, given the speed at which everything is moving and the conversations we're having and the planning we're having to do in this dynamic environment, my big dream would that be everyone could have access to both the resources and the time to appropriately plan for whatever attack may come at them. We know that's not the way it works, especially in the for-profit world, and how, bottom line can sometimes drive how we move resources around and everything. It's the same thing on the government side, right? So we're trying to make sure that we understand where we're putting resources for maximum value. So I would just say, in a perfect world, everyone would have the time and the resources to do the planning, to prepare for, certain threats or threat actors, and to really build that resilience. We know that's not reality, but bringing it back to the CISA perspective, if we can take on some of that for you or partner with you or help you with some of that planning, please reach out to us. We would be happy to work with you all and your sector risk management agency so that you don't always have to start from zero. You don't always have to have all of the resources in-house, that you can take advantage of some of our expertise as well and really work with CISA to bolster your defenses.
Well, Steve, thank you. CISA has been a great partner to the Chamber and to the business community, and we look forward to many successes for you and your team.
Same here. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everyone. Great to see you all.
Welcome to the stage, Catherine Strickland with Feeding America, Marcus Coleman with United Way Worldwide, and Rita Carreon from Unidos US in conversation with Marvin Carr Liggins from Walmart.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. This is a different room than I'm used to speaking in at the Chamber. I recently started a new role at Walmart Norma Foundation, but previously I was on the workforce side, and so I was usually with the Chamber's workforce space. So one of the things that we've heard a lot in the last couple of days are different definitions of resilience. I'm going to add another one. Is that okay? When I took this role, the first thing I thought about resilience was in my engineering background. I'm a systems and material science engineer by training. And when I first took this role, I thought about the word toughness. And the engineering definition for toughness is the ability for energy absorption to the point of rupture. But in material science, the definition of resilience is energy absorption to the point of bounce back. And as I thought about the role and what we're going to do today, I wanted to offer an even more broader lens for that. Resilience isn't only about individual or institutional grit or toughness. It is relational capacity. It's about whether every person, customer, member, associate, supplier, and every business can access what they need and who they need before, during, and after disruption. At Walmart, we operate in thousands of locations across the country. 90% of Americans live within 10 miles of a Walmart. That's a business fact for us. But it's also an opportunity for us. Our community resilience portfolio at Walmart and the Walmart Foundation spans disaster preparedness and recovery, our global hunger relief, and community connection and belonging portfolios. And here's why we hold those three things together. Food insecurity turns everyday life into a continuous emergency, which makes it much harder for a family to absorb the next emergency. Where neighbors don't know each other, there's no one to check on the elderly, there's no one to check on the neighbor next door across the street. So when the food bank is already strong, where neighbors are already connected, when trust already exists, that's one less thing a family has to solve in its crisis. It's one less thing an emergency manager has to stand up from scratch. Hunger relief and social connections aren't separate from disaster work. They are resilience infrastructure. We depend on healthy, connected, resilient communities. Our associates live in them. Our suppliers operate within them. Our customers navigate them every day. And frankly, our business success depends on these communities having access to the nutritious food and ability to cover when disaster or any type of intervention exists. That's why we think about community resilience as a whole system. Because at the end of the day, a community is more resilient when people know they can feed their families tomorrow and when they know their neighbors will be there when it matters the most. So today's conversation brings together leaders who understand that resilience is a shared responsibility. And I'm happy to have these grantees and partners with us. We have Rita Carrion, a great friend and the Vice President of Health at Unidos US. Marcus Coleman, Vice President of Community Resilience Strategy at United Way Worldwide. And Kathleen Strickland, who's the Chief Network Officer at Feeding America. All right, you ready to get into it? Yes. All right. My first question is actually going to go with you, Rita. What are the biggest barriers you see that prevent communities from accessing food, support, and services, especially when disaster strikes?
So Marvin, thank you, and it's great to be here. I think a lot of the work that we've been doing at Unidos US was formerly the National Council of La Raza. We are a national organization that partners with about 300 community-based organizations. So we're across the country, have a network. We work every day to ensure that Latinos and communities are able not only to survive, but also to thrive. And so a lot of the work, and while I may talk about the work around health, we also do housing counseling, we do workforce development, economic mobility, education, and sprinkled into all of that is civic engagement and immigration integration. So a lot of the work in terms of how we think about resilience and the barriers we see every day consistently come through every single disaster that we have seen and disruption that we have seen. And so I'll highlight about 4 of them. One of the things, and I'm using my 10 cards because I'm at the stage of, and I'm just going to normalize it, premenopausal, so I may not be completely on tap, but I need my notes.
We got you.
Yeah, okay, I know. And I know a lot of partners, support us. So. So I think one of the biggest things, and I was really glad to see the youth talk about the work that they were doing and started really young, but Cameron mentioned about his dad saying that he didn't get that emergency response. So information that people cannot access is the same as not having any information at all. It is super important for us, and I think we all know this, is that we need to have timely information, clear information, and in-language information. And what do I mean about in-language? It is ensuring that it is language that people can understand. And a lot of times, and with major cuts, oftentimes that second or third language is cut, and we're only being able to provide that information in that language. It's almost functioning, and even with technology, it's all digital, and a lot of things are disruptive. So when we not have access to that information, then it makes the recovery much longer and harder. The other area that I think is also that we've been seeing, and we saw this with Hurricane Maria, Irma, Harvey, we were together actually as partners, at our conference, when the shooting happened in El Paso, and it is that fear. Fear is a disaster multiplier. What we're seeing today is that we see a lot of families are fearing whether they're going to be discriminated, whether they're going to be separated with their families, or whether they're going to be deported. And that should not be happening in this country. I think the important thing for us is we don't want them to be unseen, and then we're not going to be able to help everyone. We're in this work together because we want to help human beings. And fear should not be that element to keep us from being able to do some of this work effectively. And then you talked about trust. And trust is very important. It's not only the gaps, and it's not just the lack of resilience, but it limits our response. We know that with our community-based organizations that we work with, when we're only utilized for temporary partners or optional partners, that core need of not working with local community-based organizations is that you're missing from those that already have been trusted for a long time, where they provide needs and support. A lot of our CBOs, and we actually even have Hispanic Chambers of Commerce that are part of our affiliate network, educations, institutions, charter schools, workforce development agencies. We know and do this every day. So it's important for us to be able to trust not only the established relationships that we have with our communities, but help facilitate that connection with institutions. And then fourth, because we are in DC and where our headquarters are right up the street, it is something that we've been working on significantly over the last couple of years, and actually why we were established as a civil rights and advocacy organization, because we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity and fairness and a just society to live in this country. And we know that disasters also expose long-standing policy, data, and investments when there's failures to invest in our infrastructure. And oftentimes, these disruptions can be man-made. And so when there's cuts to programs, like potentially SNAP, well, not potentially, we see it now, 3 million people are not having access to SNAP, or the cuts that we're going to see in Medicaid. These are critical elements to just make sure that we are having the basic needs that we need. So disasters don't create inequality, they just reveal them. So I think those 4 areas are super important for us to address as the barriers, and we can talk about what does that look like in terms of how we can fix them.
Thanks, Rita. That's a really good transition to Catherine. We know Feeding America serves tens of millions of people every year. What has the Feeding America network taught you about the gap between resources that exist and people's ability to reach them, particularly in rural and underserved areas?
Yeah, no, really appreciate the question, Marvin, and also just thank you and the U.S. Chamber for hosting us today and allowing us to be part of this critical conversation. And I think it's really fitting, Marvin, because Feeding America's relationship with Walmart started in the wake of Hurricane Katrina with a $1 million gift to ensure that residents impacted by that hurricane had food access. So I think it might be helpful for me just to give you a snapshot of how Feeding America operates. So we are a national network of over 250 food banks, which are essentially nonprofit food distributors. So think of commercial scale warehousing, drive-in cold storage, fleets of refrigerated trucks. And that enables us to handle and distribute food directly to people facing hunger, but predominantly through 60,000 grassroots food pantries and food programs. And that means that we're able to provide nearly 6 billion meals every year in every county, parish, and borough across this U.S. And so when we think about the gaps between basically food and people's access to it, we've learned one critical thing, and that is to listen to the people most impacted by the problem that you're wanting to solve. So we listen directly to people facing hunger because they are in the best position to tell us what the barriers are and how to solve it. So several years ago, we hosted listening sessions and regional summits across this country, not only with all of our members, but also with people with living experience of food insecurity to tell us what should our priorities be as a national network for the next 5 years. And they were very direct and very clear that they deeply valued their connection to the supports and the opportunities that our network offered. And there were so many neighbors and communities that they are aware of that were not. And they told us about people who are homebound and unable to reach a food distribution, working moms who simply do not have the time to get to a food pantry during their hours of operation, as well as communities who are historically left out, like rural residents and communities of color. And they also told us not only what to prioritize, but how to solve it. And they urged us to develop relationships with people who are leaders and organizations already trusted in those communities. And when we have pursued that, it has been a game changer for us. It has really unlocked opportunities and it's changing how we operate. And I'd love just to give 2 quick examples. One of them is in Southeast Missouri. So that food bank there started doing listening sessions with neighbors and community leaders, just like we did nationally, and they learned something that deeply surprised them, and they were a bit chagrined by it. So they had been operating a mobile pantry within a community that was predominantly Black, hosted by a church, and they learned from the pastor, most importantly from the pastor's wife, and congregants that pantry, being mobile, gave a message that was unintended, because the community was just thinking, oh, when the funding dries up, they're just going to pull out like everyone else has, and they're not really interested in a real, authentic relationship. And the food bank was just completely shocked because that was not actually their intention, and it completely changed how they operate. So that food bank now has community engagement staff members that are of and from and are rooted in that community. And they sat down at tables with congregants and with the pastor to plan services. So now not only do they have mobile pantries that are there, but also they're working on things like a farmer's market and exploring opportunities like things that United Way is vested in, like daycare. Another example I'll just give from a national level, what this has inspired is for us to really examine who we're in relationship with and who we're not, and we should be. And that's what embarked us on this journey of becoming connected to Unidos US. And Rita's now serving on Feeding America's board. And this made all the difference in the world when Helene and Milton hit. You know, that impacted 16 of our members across 6 states, but we were able to connect local food banks to Unidos local affiliates to ensure if there was a need for translators, they were connected. If there was need for accurate information about where those food distributions were, they were connected. So it's made all the difference.
I love that. Thank you, Catherine. I'm going to switch to you, Marcus.
All right.
I mean, you're from a very small organization.
I am. Very small.
Very small.
We just got here.
Yes, yes. United Way, and I think it's the work you're doing right now is fitting, right? You know, United Way works across a broad spectrum of community needs, be that hunger, be that access to education and workforce. How do you see these vulnerabilities we talked about this morning compounding, where a lack of one resource like food or housing makes people more fragile when the next disaster hits?
No, I appreciate the question, Marvin. I appreciate the Chamber for hosting this convening. So there's 3 ways that I see this really challenging United Way and challenging, I think, many of our organizations. And it's actually rooted in what the Resilience Conference talked about last year and what they had in their report Beyond the Preparedness Payoff. They talked about 6 levers, essentially, to build resilience. And 3 of them that I'll cover, civic engagement, cross-sector leadership, risk-informed design. So United Way has been around for 138 years. It is remarkable as we look at America's 250th anniversary that we are continuing to ask the question, how do we show up for our neighbors in times of crisis? And at United Way, you know, something that's fundamentally true is that at the center of the story of any community, to what my friends at Feeding America and Unidos US talked about, is making sure that we have two-way communication and be able to assess and act on community needs, and that's what we're focused on at United Way alongside many of our partners. So when we talk about civic engagement and the power of civic engagement, it's been encouraging. The Chamber, Walmart, Home Depot, Verizon, a few others have been helping us guide through this question of what does the platform of United Way need to be? So our United Way is operating communities by working with smaller community-based organizations, by convening spaces to have conversations like this, and by making sure that we're allocating resources in a way that makes sense. But who do we need to be to make sure that we are thinking about the social infrastructure in addition to conversations that are happening about the critical infrastructure? And in places like the greater Valdosta area, our United Way partnered with the local food bank, Salvation Army, Red Cross, before Helene happened. When Helene occurred, those same relationships translated into addressing food insecurity and social and emotional well-being. When we talk about cross-sector leadership, of course, it is still tornado season. And so we think about some of the power that we see in cross-sector leadership in places like Enid, Oklahoma, where the mayor brings together the food bank, Salvation Army, Red Cross, the United Way, and talks about, we've had a tornado here, and we're going to start with cross-sector leadership to ensure that we're not duplicating efforts and that we're optimizing opportunities to help places stay open, help people get back to work, and if folks are not able to get back and work and get to school, that they have the support that they need. And so, you know, when I think about just the challenge that's in front of us, I'll go to the last lever, risk-informed design. Many of our communities know the risk landscape is changing. Was able to spend some time this February with United Way leaders in Western North Carolina, and as many of you would assume, they didn't plan for that much water to hit their part of the state. Hawaii didn't plan for a fire the size of what happened in Maui and then have substantial flooding a few years later. Many of the communities that we all serve don't plan for extreme heat, but we know that the risks are increasing, and that informs how we need to continue to collaborate. And it's been amazing to see the power of not just United Way's network, but really the nonprofit sector really step up and step into a new space to think about how we can leverage that ability to keep communities engaged civically and promote some of their cross-sector leadership to come up with practical solutions to help people be better prepared for what's to come.
Thanks. That's really helpful, Marcus. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about in our portfolio is our grantees. We haven't really convened our grantees together. We have our food and hunger grantees in one portfolio. We have our grantees focused on connection and addressing the issue of loneliness in one portfolio, and then disaster grantees in a different portfolio. And one thing that through Brooks's leadership and with work with the rest of the team, is we're really thinking about what is the operating model required in the community so that a community can bounce back, does have the plasticity during a natural disaster to make it stronger. Why? For many reasons, right? The operating environment that would ensure that our associates can get back to work, that our customers can come back into the stores, that the supply chain continues to move so that milk can get to needy families is an essential piece to all of that. And so that thinking about the operating system, I really want to ask another question, and we want to keep the answers succinct as we try to get to deeper questions at the end. Rita, UNIDO's, of course, focuses on Latino communities. Thinking about this broader conversations, can you share examples of a model or approach that's worked really well through UNIDO's work?
Yeah, and well, we're one of the largest Latino civil rights organizations. Our affiliates, community-based organizations, see everyone that comes through the door. So we also have coalitions and partnerships, whether it's with Feeding America, United Way, the National Urban League, NAACP, the Asian Pacific Health Forum. We work in community, not only at the national level, but also at the local level. And I think one of the biggest models for us, especially in the health space, and we see them as critical to a lot of the other work in terms of our housing counseling and workforce development, is our trusted messengers, which are promotoras de salud, or community health workers. They know the community, they're trusted, they come from the community, they are also themselves having that lived experience, and so they are able to navigate what is important and where, how to kind of be able to connect with the systems that a lot of these communities are not necessarily involved in. And we've been able to, and because of their mobilization and the work that we do as a kind of a training, technical assistance, communication support, providing them with toolkits, we're able to really meet the need at a multiple localized level. During COVID, we were able to, establish about 34,000 public and private partnerships across the country. We stood up a number of different sites that was able to get up to 12,000 sites to make sure that people understood what was happening and what information they needed on a timely basis. And then we were able to train about 5,000 trusted messengers to be able to go out into the community and be able to function and stuff. So I think the force is that, what is it, the cultural lens and that secret sauce is on our promotores de salud.
Thank you. Perfect. Catherine, I'm going to go back to you. I think very similarly, Feeding America thinks about food access as a resilience strategy. So how have you been thinking about that in order to make communities stronger, better prepared for the next disaster?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for us, food access is an antidote to hunger, which is an everyday disaster in the lives of millions of children and individuals every year. And for us, food access is central to our strategies. It's core to who we are. And that's why we're, with Walmart support, investing in the infrastructure of food pantries all across this country so that they can recover food at grocery stores like Walmart's and others and bolster their supplies and increase their hours of operation. It's why we're investing in American farmers, so when they plant crops and then there's not a market for it for forces beyond their control, they are still able to harvest that and ensure that through our network, it's reaching the tables of families. It's why we're investing in food banks to have the ability to process protein. So when partners like Tyson sell more chicken breasts than, say, drumsticks, we're able to accept those bulk donations of proteins, process and package them, and ensure they reach families' tables. It's also why we're partnering with technology companies so that just by inserting your zip code, you can get accurate information anywhere in this country where to access food. But more than that, we're investing in relationships. And that's so to make it easy for all of us to act as neighbors helping neighbors. I am from Alabama, if you can't tell from my accent, and grew up in food banking in Alabama, and was actually on staff at a food bank when the F4 and F5 tornadoes tore through that state in 2011. And we were without power, we were without communications, no cell phone service, there was no fuel that you could access. And just through a resilient community response, we were able to mobilize and make that response happen. But one thing I will never forget is in Phil Campbell, Alabama, that's the northwest corner of the state. There was one of our food pantry partners, a small Baptist church. It was brick. They had just paid off their mortgage. That tornado swept it clean off its foundation. It was there 1 hour. It was not the next. And 24 hours later, out of respect for his privacy, I will just call him Paul, the food pantry leader. He lost his daughter in that storm. And yet he showed up the next day at the food bank with his truck to fill it with supplies, because he knew that there were others in his community that had also lost loved ones. And he set aside his own pain and his own grief because he knew that others may not accept help from a stranger, but they would from him, because he was known and trusted. And I will never forget that. And so we are striving to make it easier for people to act on the care that they have for each other. So fast forward today, I'm happy to say that my hometown food bank in Alabama, they are now operating out of a state-of-the-art facility with generator support. They can handle any surge in product that's needed in a disaster. They have a safe room for their staff and community members. They are connected to their local EMAs, not only at the local level, but at the state level. They are hosting disaster conversations with local VOADs, with United Way, to plan. And I'll also say that they now have a branch very close to Phil Campbell, so that now the next time that disaster strikes, Paul and people like him will not have to come to us. We can go to them.
Thank you. I'm going to pivot a little bit and throw you off your game, Marcus. That's okay. That's okay. All right. So I'm just going to know that. This ain't prepared remarks. Yeah. Marcus, can you talk about what you've learned in your role, and about the role the private sector can play, not just in funding, but in strengthening ties between community resources, especially that's needed during disaster?
That's a great question, man. And I'll go to Russ Strickland from Maryland Emergency Management and Patrick Sheehan from Tennessee Emergency Management. Was able to join them and several emergency managers yesterday for a conversation convened by the Chamber. And some realities, I think, is the good thing is in emergency management, at least, we have the tools and the mechanisms for resilience. We can set up the formal agreements through the emergency operations plans, talking about roles in emergency operations centers. There's an entire engagement process that involves the community. And so the good thing is in the emergency management system, the opportunity for the feedback loop exists. Where community-based organizations like ours, can continue to be helpful, is ensuring that we can help build that trust, and as appropriate and in a respectful way, bring perspectives for folks that may not necessarily know what an EOC, ICS, or any of the acronyms that come with emergency management are, but do understand we need to feed people, we need to shelter people, people need access to different kind of healthcare services. And so I'll say my recommendation as we think about where we head from here, one of them is just very practically, where can local chambers, local community, our respective local chapters come to those local emergency managers and say, let's take a second look at the emergency operations plan and how we work together, and then where can we identify gaps for how we continue to meet some of these needs. Nationally, and this is where I've been so thankful for partners like Walmart and for the Chamber, is it's helping, especially the course of incoming executives on the nonprofit side, continue to connect with executives on the private sector side. Because I think what we know is true is the past 8+ years, there's been a lot of changes and disruptions, and I think a lot of the operating assumptions have shifted. And so having rooms like this connect, or rooms like the National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters, which is also meeting right now in Reno, is going to continue to be critical, so we can continue to do some of that practical emergency operations planning work on the ground locally, but then we can also ensure that executives can continue to understand how to align capabilities and capacities at the national level.
That's such a great point. One of the things that there are two things that are looming that I think that folks are worried about across the country, right? The first thing, of course, we hear about the dramatic drop-off in college enrollment, but there's also a looming dramatic drop-off in leadership, particularly nonprofit leadership and volunteerism, right? And so super worried about that kind of continuity of operations and leadership and thought and institutional knowledge leaving communities. So I'm going to end us with a question for all of you. If you could change one thing about how we as a country prepare communities for disruption, what would it be? Simple, what would it be? Rita?
Well, I think disaster sees no color, but response does. And so I think we all have a responsibility to change that. I honestly think that we're all humans at the end of the day. And we're living in an amazing, beautiful country that we're about to celebrate 250 years of beautiful parks and people and gatherings and being able to connect with each other. We have a responsibility to make sure that we're protecting our country.
Thank you.
I would say I have seen such powerful commitment to community in times of disaster. And I believe that we can carry that forward in every day. I've seen food pantry leaders share resources and change hours of operation in order to meet the need during Helene and Milton. And I think that they can, if we can come together and bring that better together ethos under blue skies, then we will have the resilience that can weather any disaster and always emerge from them stronger.
Yeah. For me, I think proactive investment in community engagement. So in New Orleans, I know many of our companies were probably sitting with communities throughout the Gulf looking at 20 years past since Hurricane Katrina. And two things that were instructive for me. One, whenever there was proactive community investment, recovery outcomes tended to be better in some communities. And then for the communities that didn't have that proactive investment, it's been amazing to see. We were with Verizon and others where we were opening up a resiliency center, but being able to have that proactive investment to access to information. Like, I'm challenged by the panel that we had from some of the youth and young adults that were speaking up here earlier. Like, the thing that I think that proactive investment does is ensures that we answer the question of how everybody can receive alerts, warning, and information in a language in a way that they understand. Yeah. And so that's the one thing that I think would shift and really create some of the catalysts for the resilience that we seek in this country.
And real quick, what can philanthropy do to support that exact thing?
I mean, that's a straightforward question, man. No, you know what? I appreciate when philanthropy provides space for folks to speak beyond funding. So like the reality for our local chapters is very real. Bills got to get paid. Right. But what's also true is that we appreciate corporate philanthropy, institutional philanthropy, and others, again, being able to provide some spaces and places to help really infuse conversations that are beyond some of the short-term realities, but then be able to invest with multi-year thinking. Yep. I think many of our local United Ways are very clear. They have answers to solutions, but it's hard to think about solving those solutions where if every year they got to figure out how are we going to keep this momentum building. Right. So that would be a practical way.
And what about you, Catherine and Rita? How might the private sector, right, not just big companies like Walmart, but small business leaders?
Yeah, I mean, your expertise. Hunger is a solvable problem, and it's a complex one. So we can certainly benefit if you have expertise in technology, healthcare, logistics, the food industry, but also communications, marketing, finance. When I think about what happened in Asheville, North Carolina, that was the first time we ever lost a food bank's entire facility and all their supplies in a flood because of Helene. And within one business day, that food bank was up and operating and distributing food. That was because of the private sector coming forward and ensuring that their leadership team had a place to mobilize. Your expertise is so vital for us to be not only effective, but efficient.
Yeah, and I would say not only it's around the relationship. Yes, the funding is important, and we need to make sure that we're paying our bills. But a lot of our relationships is also ensuring that it's not transactional. It's being able to call each other up and say, hey, we need some trucks to head out to Puerto Rico, for example, or be able to connect with each other. That's a critical element for us and how we see it, and not for folks to see community-based organizations as temporary partners or optional partners or at risk because they're too small or they serve a certain population and I've got to make sure I'm okay. No, this is about communities and being able to share each other's resources, being able to ensure that there are assets that come from both ends. A lot of the Latino communities and communities, they know how to fix things. They fix them throughout. When we were not getting support in Puerto Rico during Hurricane Maria, you had a number of affiliates pushing and pulling information out to Puerto Rico. And we were able to allocate resources and help a lot of families locate to the states in different parts of the states. So I think there is this level of not just a transaction, but a relationship.
Perfect. Well, thank you to this illustrious panel. Can you give them all a hand, please? And thank you to the Chamber for allowing us to share it with you today.
Welcome to the stage, Michael Hecht from Greater New Orleans, Inc.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Oh, the countdown clock starts immediately. Well, let's get right into this. My name is Michael Hecht. I just flew in from New Orleans, Louisiana, and boy, are my arms tired. What I'm going to try to do now is give you all a real-world example of how we used coalitions to, I don't know whether it was building resilience or just to save our butts, but it worked. And then I'm going to talk about something we're doing today, trying to replicate the model with even bigger ambitions. I'm going to take this back to 2012, over a decade ago. Who here is familiar with Biggert Waters, which was the legislation that came out for flood insurance back then? One person in the audience, chicken dinner. Congratulations. This was a legislation that came out to fix flood insurance. Like any good piece of legislation, it had massive unintended consequences and was actually going to have the impact of throwing millions of people out of their homes. Basically, the way the legislation was written, it was going to increase flood insurance rates for people across coastal America by about 5,000%. This was a problem. We had a situation where people were holding town halls and were actually just dropping their keys off at the feet of their legislators because they had no idea how they were going to pay their insurance, and without insurance you can't have a mortgage. And so it was what we typically call no bueno in the policy sphere. This was going to hit Louisiana and New Orleans first because that's what we do. And so we had a problem that we were going to get kind of eradicated by this policy. And then the second thing we realized, and this is at that moment in your life, we go through these moments in our life. One, we realize our parents don't know what they're talking about. Then we realize our doctors don't know what they're talking about. This was the moment we realized that our legislators don't know what they're talking about. This moment came, we were having a meeting with FEMA on some major levees in one of our parishes, and we were looking at a map, and it was us, and it was Senator Landrieu and Senator Vitter, and we realized that the levees that we were on that protected this parish were not actually on the FEMA maps, that they didn't exist in FEMA world. And so that's when we realized that they actually had no idea what they were doing. So we were in trouble. We realized that we needed a political campaign. So like any political campaign, and this is still just New Orleans, the first thing we did is come up with our kind of theory of the case, our PowerPoint, our pitch deck, came out with some ways of describing what was going on with the revised flood insurance law, where we said that this law as written is economically unwise and morally unjust, little zingers like that were going to be good on CNN and MSNBC and Fox. Then we needed a name. We came up with the Coalition for Sustainable Flood Insurance, because those are all really positive words. Set up our website. We did our logo, which looks strangely like the U.S. Chamber logo. Our lawyers will be in touch with your lawyers. And so we did all this, and it was great, and nothing happened because nobody cared, because everybody loves to go. I was actually just talking to somebody as I was coming in. They're like, "Oh, you're from New Orleans. I went there for my bachelor party." I'm like, "Great." I'm like, "Did you still get married?" He goes, "Yeah." I mean, it wasn't that much of a bachelor party. But New Orleans, figures well in the imagination for music and culture and food and football, not necessarily for political stroke in D.C. So we started adding some members, and it was really very local, a lot of Louisiana parishes and politicians and organizations. Then we got lucky. And we got lucky because Superstorm Sandy hit New York City, where I'm from. And at that point, when Wall Street flooded, when the subways flooded, then we got Chuck Schumer. Then we got Gold Bar Bob Menendez, right, back in those days. It's not too soon. It's not too soon. It's not too soon, right? And this is Louisiana. We have people who literally store cash in their freezers, so I get to talk about this stuff, right? Remember that? Congressman Jefferson, $100,000 in the freezer, cold cash. This is a true story, folks. So anyway, once that happened, suddenly New York was interested. And once New York was interested, we were able to get Florida interested, because Florida was going to hit by this as well. And so suddenly we were able to start having these weekly phone calls with around the country. This was pre-COVID, pre-Zoom, so they were just conference calls with up to 100 people on them. And we slowly were able to add, major national groups like the Realtors, National Association of County Executives, local real estate groups. We were able to have local politicians. We had one gentleman from Massachusetts who was particularly involved. And so this thing kind of grew, so that over a number of months, we ended up having about 250 organizations across 35 states in the country who we said were part of the Coalition for Sustainable Flood Insurance. And let me be very clear. The coalition was fake. It didn't exist. We were a 50C nada, okay? But what we did have was a logo, a website, an increasingly large list of politicians from both sides of the aisle, because at the end of the day, home affordability is really a pocketbook issue. We were able to start working the media, getting into the media. We had some advocates on our side who were very good at the media, like Senator Landrieu on our side. And so we kind of became the de facto face of the pushback on Biggert Waters. And so suddenly this thing where we thought we had no chance, we suddenly realized that we maybe had a chance because we had bipartisan support. Now, there were people who were against us. There were folks on the far left, my right, your left, who didn't like flood insurance at all because they think the coast should be for birds and not for people. And then we had people on the far right. I remember Congressman Jeb Hensarling from Texas, who said he wouldn't care if his grandmother got thrown out of her house because of flood insurance. So he was not going to be on our side. He said that. But in the middle, we had all these Americans now represented by all these grassroots organizations. And with that, we had the power to go to D.C. and to write legislation. And so we write the Homeowners Flood Insurance Affordability Act of 2014, which seems highfalutin, but basically all it did was get rid of Biggert Waters and get us back to zero. And treading water sometimes feels like success in our Congress these days. And then subsequently, over his own objections, President Obama signed this into legislation. And so what started as something where we were totally isolated and nobody cared, because of our slow building of grassroots, because of our minding of this on a weekly basis, also because of the fact I think that New Orleans is so powerless that people were happy to have us organized. We're kind of like the bird that goes into the crocodile's mouth and cleans the teeth. Like, we were let in by places like Texas and Florida and California and New York because really, like, we couldn't hurt anybody. And we eventually were able to rewrite national legislation. And so it was a great object lesson in the ability to use a coalition to amplify an issue. I guess Senator Cassidy had a great way of saying it, is that sometimes to solve a problem, you have to make it bigger. We took the local problem, we nationalized it, we had some luck. I'm saying luck because it was bad luck in terms of Hurricane Sandy, and we were able to get it done. So that was the old example. So let me tell you about what we're doing right now. We're trying to update the playbook and shoot the moon. The big issue that we have right now is not flood insurance, it's homeowners insurance. Homeowners insurance has gone crazy because of increased exposure, because of inflation, because of billboard attorneys. And so what you have now is that in terms of carrying costs for homes, flood insurance is like a slow-moving glacier. Home insurance is like an avalanche. And it's our position that the current way that we do homeowners insurance, where you have one policy for wind and fire, another policy for flood, and basically all of it is unaffordable, is not going to work for middle America relative to increasing exposure. And again, increasing exposure is not just climate change, it's cost of rebuilding, it's lawsuits, it's all the things that make, it's regulation, all the things that make building expensive. And so what we are proposing is a totally new all hazards national catastrophic policy where every homeowner who has a federally backed mortgage in America, which is about 80 million of us, would have to put in some amount every year. If I'm in some place really safe and boring like Indiana, maybe it's $100. If I'm in some place really exciting and dangerous like New Orleans, maybe it's $1,000. But from that you get a corpus of tens of billions of dollars a year, and then what happens is the federal government comes in and attaches onto insurance policies at, say, like 100,000 of exposure. So the private sector, the State Farms of the world, still writes the ticky-tack stuff, but they can do it cheaper because they know that they are basically backstopped at some attachment point, like $100,000, and that's where the federal government comes in, and we now have a true insurance program because it's diversified across the country. And that way we can allow the private sector to still pay, but create basically caps on premiums so people can stay in their homes. It's going to be very difficult to get this done. People hate cross-subsidization. People don't trust the government. Our current programs like Social Security are bankrupt. But because of our experience over a decade ago with Bigger Waters, we think that if we build this, this coalition, we have a chance of starting the conversation and getting something done. So right now we have legislation that's being run by our Representative Troy Carter and by 3 other reps from around the country that would set up a study group to look at an all-hazards national catastrophic policy that would include flood, fire, earthquake, volcano, Benson Boone, all of the national threats that we're under right now. And basically, thank you for everybody who got that joke. And we think that we can push it out. Again, with the confidence or the hubris of knowing that even though we're tiny, with clever marketing and with clever coalition building, we actually have the opportunity to change policy at a national level. Let me end with one thing. I got 1 minute left, so I got 1 minute for my diatribe. I hate the word resilience. Resilience is typically used by politicians as an excuse for poor planning and poor execution. Oh, the people of Louisiana, they're so resilient. Every time they get flooded and lose everything because of a storm, they get right back up, Cajun Navy. That's bullshit, right? What you really need, right? What you really need is policies and planning so that natural hazards, which are going to happen all of the time, do not become personal and property disasters. And that's about mitigation. That's about planning. That's about how we build our homes. And if we do that better, then what you're going to be is, and this is from General Honore, on the left side of the disaster curve, which means preventing loss before it happens. That is politically much more difficult, but ultimately a much more efficient way to go. And with that, it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everybody. Great to be here. Appreciate you.
Welcome to the podium, Rob Glenn from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation.
So we're at the end of the conference, and so I want to say first thanks to everyone here in the room, and then also to our sponsors for making this all happen. I think we just have heard over the last couple of days just how there's a number of different challenges that we have ahead, but we can also go a lot farther together. The boundary between order and disorder is potentially thinner than we'd like to admit. We also, I think, reflected that nature doesn't necessarily negotiate, and complexity doesn't necessarily pause, that there's not just one disaster, but potentially multiple disasters to kind of contend with concurrently, and that complacency can be very expensive. AI will be a game changer in how we forecast, coordinate, and respond to public safety events, other kinds of disasters, and also just for planning purposes. But human discernment is going to be essential. Leadership is going to be essential, and how communities and how our country does create a safer future for the next generation. It's going to require discipline to prepare, the judgment to decide under uncertainty and with not all the facts, and then staying engaged well after the crisis. That's what this conference is about, and I think that that's why, in many respects, why we are all here, so that the choices that we're talking about making today will eventually become a reality. And I think the choice is whether the next generation inherits strength or the next generation inherits fragility. It really is up to us. So as we're closing the conference, it's really appropriate that the next components focuses on resilience as a strategic investment, leading through community. We're really fortunate to have Eric McNulty from Harvard here. And then also a field trip to really look at the built environment and what should the built environment of the future look like. I think we all, tomorrow when we wake up, we're going to look in the mirror. It really is up to every single one of us to impact the future. And it really is up to us and for those that look up to us. So with that, thank you for being here. And we look forward to seeing you at our next event.
Please make your way to your selected breakouts by 11:30 a.m., which are currently listed on the main screen. For those of you walking to the field trip to American Institute of Architects, please meet us in the lobby at 12:30 p.m. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Please take your seats. The program is about to resume.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jasper Cook. I'm a Vice President for Community Resilience and Emergency Management at WSP, and we have a couple stellar panelists here today. We wanted to talk about resilience as an investment, and so I kind of want to share a story with a little bit of context to set the stage here. I first started, I know there's a lot of FEMA alumni out here, so a lot of people are going to be familiar with this, but I started at the agency in 2013, and of course it was the glory days of Roy Wright, and around the same time one of the other pillars of the agency was David Bebo. He went on to lead response and recovery and a lot of other jobs, but at the time he was the head of the associate administrator for the policy office. So he had both strategy, understanding what the challenges are that the agency faces and how to deal with that, and he also had the data people on his team. And he used to walk, it's kind of a core memory for me, he used to walk around with a simple chart. Going across the bottom, it had years, a chronology of the past 20 or 30 years. And going up the side, it had cost. So it's the cost of disasters over time. And spoiler alert, everyone, the graph only went one way. It's not as bad as a hockey stick, but it was a climbing curve over time. And that was one of the core challenges at the agency. How do we flatten the curve? How do we make disasters cost less? And at that time, again, 2013, 2014, 2015, it was already at the forefront of everyone's consciousness, and it was already an old issue. And now, it's 2026, 10 or almost 15 years ago. So you might think, wow, this issue has been around for a quarter of a century. It must be really complex. But I don't actually think it is. It's certainly hard. I think you've heard over the past today and yesterday a lot of the challenges that we face. So it's 100% hard, but I actually think it's a very simple issue. If you want to make disasters cost less, there's only one way to do it. You have to invest in resilience, disaster risk reduction, effective risk management, whatever you want to call it. You have to make those investments. And the key word here is investment. It's something that you do, if you take, if you're starting out in your career, the advice everybody gives you, hey, make sure you max out your 401k. And the reason you do that is because you put that money in an index fund in the stock market, and then at the end of your career, you see, you've 20 or 30 years later, you can say, wow, look at what we've built. And community resilience is the same way. You make that investment, and then you have, at the community level, you have a situation where 1 + 1 = 3 or 5. It's additive because you have a community where the schools are strong, you're able to reopen quickly after a disaster, the hospitals are not impacted by natural disasters, they're able to still see patients. And that's the kind of situation where you see that in some communities across the country where they have made those investments. The other thing I wanted to point out is, I'm glad that we're able to have this panel at the Chamber of Commerce, because what do businesses need to succeed? They need a stable, a stable climate for investment, where even when the disasters strike, you're able to bounce back quickly. And again, so it really makes the critical point that resilience is an investment. So I'll turn to our speakers. We'll dive in, and then we do have a little bit of time. I want everybody to start saving up some of your ideas and suggestions. We'll do breakouts after our opening remarks here, and then we'll capture some of those. So to start with, I'm going to go to Elena. I'm going to throw a softball. Parametric, hopefully a softball. Parametric insurance is something that's come up a lot with the FEMA Review Council, but I think a lot of state emergency managers, and especially county, and even some of our partners on the business side might think parametric insurance, I don't know what that is. You know what's going on. So can you just explain what parametric insurance is and give maybe an example of that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jasper, and I'm happy to be here. Maybe just quickly to who I am.
Please.
I'm Elena Benzoltane. I'm with Swiss Re. That's a global reinsurance company. I sit with the public sector solutions team. So when I speak, it's really about with my clients in the back of my mind, but a lot of these things obviously also apply to businesses. We work with federal, state, local government, helping them really think through the risk exposure, how to mitigate that risk, and then, of course, eventually also how to transfer that risk to the private sector. So everybody in this room knows what insurance is, right? You pay premiums, you know, something bad happens, you go through a loss and claims adjustment process, and at some point you'll get money back to recover from the actual damage that you incurred. Now, parametric insurance really works very differently. It doesn't indemnify the actual loss, so a broken roof, but it indemnifies the event happening and its intensity. So let's say for hurricanes, right? We look at the wind speed at a predefined location. If that wind speed in that location was measured, or it was met or exceeded, of course, then a payment is made. And so it's objective because it's observed by a third data provider. So it's not the insurance company that comes out and looks at your damage and, you know, negotiates with you whether or not they think you should be getting those the claims payment. So it's fast and it's there to help you recover not just from damage but from any economic loss that you might have due to an event, right? So parametric insurance has been around for a long time, but it's really taken up more, picked up more the last probably 15 years or so. And so why do public entities, but really anybody, look to it? I would say it's two main advantages. One, it's the speed of payment, right? As I said, there is no loss adjustment process. So you skip that entire process, and as soon as it's met, you know, the insured says, hey, I think we've had an event, and then we ask the third data provider, can you tell us what the wind speed was in that area? And if it's met, we make the payment. We say within 30 days, but it's oftentimes, happy to say, 3 to 7 days that the payments are made. And then the other thing is the flexibility of funds. And I think that's also what's super relevant in this discussion and when you talk about resilience, because you can't, when you buy insurance, you usually think about your assets and my infrastructure that I need to cover, but you don't think about any other economic losses that may arise from that event. And so with those funds, you can pay, you know, for evacuation costs, for overtime payment, for housing, for anything that your community or your businesses might need. And so those are really two main benefits. It's not supposed to replace your traditional insurance, right? Your traditional insurance is here as a long-term recovery tool, and parametric insurance can really help you in that front end, right? When you need liquidity the most, to respond quickly and to have those disruptions be as short as possible. And really together, they really built a more resilient risk management framework.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's a very good tool for certain things. And so it is a good opportunity to take advantage of and make everybody aware of this tool, but recognizing that it's not a perfect tool for everything. It can't replace you know, traditional insurance for those purposes.
Yeah.
Natalie, you know, can you I think leverage is an important concept where you put in a little bit of effort and you get a big return on the resilience investment. Can you talk about some of your favorite or one of your favorite examples from that world?
Yeah, absolutely. One quick thing on the FEMA Review
Please.
Council and parametric insurance.
Yes.
In the Review Council report, it is not saying we need parametric insurance. It is saying we should declare disasters based on this parametric model. So, whole host of issues there.
And hopefully tomorrow
and
we'll
we should learn about this soon. This real wood. Learn about this tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think we talk about we need more building codes. We need more resources for mitigation. But what's really going to move the needle is incentives. And so the incentive to have building codes and standards, the incentive for land use planning and those types of things. I always talk about, when I talk about this, I talk about Texas. When we think of Texas, we're not thinking, oh, Texas is great at reducing their carbon. Like, they're such a great state at doing that. But they lead the nation, actually, in renewable energy. They lead it in solar, they lead it in wind. Being an oil-producing state, that's bananas to be like, you're leading this over California. It's because of the incentives. It's a good business decision. People respond better to a carrot than a stick. And so that's one of the things that I think.
Yep.
We need incentives to do the things to do the work.
And so that kind of touches on, of course, there's the FEMA Review Council, but the other big thing in everybody's mind is the FEMA Act, which I think hopefully better incentivizes mitigation.
Yes.
Good. So I'll do one question for both of you, so maybe we'll stay with Natalie for another minute. Can you share your favorite story or most actionable story of communities increasing their own resilience?
Yes. I'm sure you've heard about this all through this conference, but Alabama. I hate that I have to talk about Alabama. I'm from New Orleans, went to Mississippi State. It's painful, but they are the gold standard when it comes to resilience. They have become more resilient in spite of the way they're set up. The state legislature is never going to adopt a statewide code, enforce the statewide code. So they've gone around that by offering grants through the Strengthen Alabama Homes. And that pairs fortified roofs with grants from the state and the Department of Insurance in Alabama up to $10,000. So while that's an incentive and it's cool, like money is a big part of the problem, it's really the incentive to do it because the insurance industry has not left Alabama, despite other Gulf states. So that's the incentive, the coordination in Alabama, the Insurance Commissioner Mark Fowler co-chairs the Alabama Resiliency Council with Jeff Smitherman, the emergency manager. Those two positions don't exactly talk throughout the country. So it's like one person's managing risk, the other person is responding to everything that we should have done before to reduce the risk. I think my favorite part about that program is that it's become so visible. Like when they announce we're going to open on this date for your grant program, homeowners are lining up, you can see them online at 3 in the morning for these fortified grants. So I've always said we need Taylor Swift to do for building codes what she did for football. And they're doing the Eras Tour down in Alabama on fortified roofs, so.
That's great, thank you. And that was a good segue from incentives. It just fed right in, almost like we planned it. Elena, can you, same question. Can you share one of your favorite stories or examples of a community building their own resilience?
Yeah. As you can guess, I'll be talking about how parametric insurance can make communities more resilient. But what we're trying to do at Swiss Re and with my team, we're really trying to help our clients think beyond, as I said, right? Just thinking about their great infrastructure and how to protect that, but really go beyond how can I help my community to stay resilient and to recover quickly from disasters, and that's how parametric insurance can really help. And there's a lot of examples, and we call it, community-based insurance, basically that, for example, we did a parametric insurance in New York City on flood, where they, the city, together with an NGO and with a broker and us, we built together this insurance policy for low-income renters because obviously they don't have homeowners insurance for flooding within specific areas of New York City. And when the rain came and the flood happened, they received a grant of $15,000 to use for whatever they may need, for renting another apartment, for making sure they're not homeless, basically. So those are ways that we, as a company that does not do personal insurance lines, right? We work with corporations or insurance companies. We can indirectly really help communities stay or be more resilient. And another big topic that's been coming up is extreme heat, right? We're seeing obviously extreme heat rising everywhere, and we're working with a city in California to help street vendors have basically revenue supplementation when it's extremely hot outside and nobody's out there buying anything, right? So the city is doing that on their behalf. And so these are just two of many stories that we're really trying to scale across the country and really the globe to help communities.
Thank you. Back to you, Natalie. So when we talk about effective risk management for communities, it's a challenge for people to translate that complex scientific data into actionable decisions at the community level. It kind of made me think of it in the story you just shared, Elena, but can you talk a little bit about how the definition of risk management has changed over the past few years and what the focus might be for communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So going in my background, also former FEMA, I used to run individual and community preparedness division, rest in peace. But we used to do all the protective action research across and we were responsible for it for the entire federal government. The book was like this big. You can't put that on ready.gov. Nobody's going to read that. So the communication is important and with lots of questions. So like the constant why, asking why would we know we are going to have disasters. It should not come as a surprise. That was a surprise. Anyway, we're going to prepare for next year. And so I think that we used to think that future risk was in the future. That's a tomorrow problem. I'll worry about that tomorrow. And all of these things are starting to converge, and we can't ignore it anymore. So we've got the climate impacts, fiscal pressure, social vulnerability. It's all coming together at the same time and creating this moment. And I have this theory that I call the triple dipper theory. We've all been to Chili's, maybe forgot Chili's existed for years. And then we started seeing social influencers, cheese pulls, going to Chili's to have their triple dipper. We need that moment. We need a viral moment to bring back something that's sleeper cell in the Chili's menu and bring it up. So we're trying to work on things that make this go viral by being just sheer ridiculous. But what I call the triple dipper in this space is policy and regulation. You can come up with whatever you want. If there's not the policy or regulation behind it to support it, it's not going anywhere. Resilient materials and infrastructure, our critical infrastructure is probably more important than anything else. It's a climate risk multiplier if the power's out. And then culture and attention. Like, resilience is not cool. Like, people fall asleep when you start talking about it. Or when Dan starts talking about parametric insurance. But
when he does, not when I do.
Yes,
okay, good.
You're fantastic. Anyway, so we need like these little sound bites, like get a fortified roof, and yeah, make it cool. We're not preppers.
Well, I mean, when the one that always sticks in my mind is after Hurricane Michael, there's one house that's still standing.
Yes.
You don't want to be it's better to be that guy than to have had your house destroyed, but also your community, if you don't invest at the community level, that person can't really still live there.
Right.
And surrounded by nothing now, so.
Yeah, and yes, the house in Lahaina was mitigated for termites, and they were just trying to get rid of termites, and that's how that house withstood the wildfire. We need more stories and vignettes like that, because for every $1, we save 6. For every $1, we save 14.
People are asleep.
Cool.
Yeah.
Like, what does that even mean? Like, when I spend $1, I don't get 14 back. You're not going to see it immediately. It's somebody else down the line will be like, oh, thanks for putting this fortified roof on that you sold me. So.
Yep. Thank you. Same question, Elena. You know, when we talk about effective risk management in communities today, what does that mean in practice, and how has that changed?
Yeah, again, from an insurance perspective, I think understanding your risk, right, that needs to be your top priority. You need to know where your stuff is, you need to know what you're exposed to, and you need to have accurate data, right? You know, we've moved from very backward-looking data, right? What has happened? Will it, happen again? And that's kind of how we planned. But, nowadays, and that's also part of what we do and what we want to help is bring awareness of everything, all the analytic tools that are out there, right? Probabilistic modeling, the scenario analytics, just any really tool that's out there that can help you not just see what has happened, but what's most likely going to happen, how fast it's going to happen, and who it's gonna affect. So I think that there has been a shift there. Obviously, we're continuously moving forward with AI now. Who knows where we're going to land there? Hopefully, we can use AI in a good way there as well. And then two is financial resilience, right? If you're financially not resilient, then everything else is, So, your budgets need to be protected, and you need to be liquid when you need it. If you don't have any money and you're scrambling to get grants and whatever else, of course they're important and relevant, and they're there to help. But having that preparedness before is crucial. And that brings me kind of to the next point, mitigation, right? Mitigation, you need insurance and mitigation need to go in tandem. Together, again, mitigation will reduce your risk, and you're talking about incentives, I agree, but your incentive should be, you just don't want to have your house flooded, right? I shouldn't have to pay you for it. You should want that, right? I understand that it's, when funds are limited, that's not the way you think. But in my opinion, for me, I want my family to be safe. That's my incentive, right? But so if you have that, and it applies to also nature-based solutions, right? When we talk about flood risk, if you, as a community, if you invest in mangroves, in wetlands, in any of those, it reduces flood risk significantly. And over time, you will see the benefits of probably reduced premiums, maybe. I don't want to promise anything, but and just so you'll have the mitigation, less risk, and hopefully less insurance costs as well.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the things we talked about backstage that it made me think of as you're talking is, you're asking about effective risk management. To me, that would be the job of the emergency manager, but often kind of organizationally across the country and kind of as a discipline, as a field, emergency management does one thing, and then separately you have risk management.
Yeah.
And even the same thing, then you have a third one that's doing the financial resilience. But for a homeowner, and I think at the community level, it's kind of an artificial breakdown. It should all be the same thing, where you're using appropriate incentives, appropriate tools in the risk toolbox to make the community safer overall and better able to deal. Some of being safer is you can't mitigate everything, and that's where you have insurance for. We've done as much as we can to reduce the risk, but we're gonna have insurance to cover the rest of it. I think we probably have time for one more question. So communities often struggle, maybe I'll start with you, Elena. It's the data question. Like, how do you go? The data that we have now is immense, and we really can, maybe not to every single house, but certainly at a community level, understand what the risk is. But maybe you look at the Texas floods, they knew what the flood risk was. They just didn't, do anything about it. Do you have any insights or best practices on how to get from the good risk data that we have for communities to actually, make the right decision, whether that's the land use, the mitigation, the insurance that you're buying?
I wish I had an answer, a good answer.
Yeah.
All I can say is that it is top of mind in the industry across the board, especially when it comes to the nature-based topic, right? We're thinking about how can we incorporate these nature-based solutions into modeling so that it does help communities in the long run by saving money. It's just not a simple question. And you, on models and everything, might probably know more than I do or than we do, but a model can't be updated every 2 years. It's very costly, so it goes every 5-6 years, and these investments are slow to show, as you said. So it's something we're talking about across the board, but I wish I had a way. I think collaboration is extremely important, as you also pointed out with emergency risk. I was saying, right? The risk managers are the ones purchasing the insurance, but the emergency managers are the ones that think about all of the responses and are influencing it. But there is oftentimes a lack of collaboration there. So, increasing collaboration and then continuing the dialogue. And hopefully get to an answer.
Yep. One of the challenges is that you can't take the human out of the decision. And for whatever reason, the human response is, it will never happen to me.
Yeah.
And it's not how reality works, unfortunately. Yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, so, well, at ICPD, we ran the National Household Survey on preparedness and perception of preparedness and risk. And it was really interesting to see the uptick in it over years. So about 98% said they had taken at least one preparedness action. Then COVID hit, and politics aside, regardless, every single person was impacted by COVID. We were running out of toilet paper, started using DoorDash, stuck in home with your family. Mine was a toddler at the time, so it was miserable, but love you. But the National Household Survey, 50% still said they were impacted by a disaster after COVID. So it's like it's not going to happen to me. If I'm going to build my house, I'd much rather this granite countertop or something else, and somebody else can worry about. My insurance agent can worry about the roof or the garage door or insert this here.
I mean, I think one of the other lessons I think of the National Household Survey is like neighbors' risk. So, before joining WSP and after FEMA, I worked for Texas Emergency Management. One of the biggest the biggest project we had for Hurricane Harvey mitigation was acquisition demolition in Harris County. It's like a $200 million project. And I started it at TDM in 2021, so it was 4 years after Harvey. And they were about halfway through spending all the money that they had. And so they had, homeowners, you have this huge flood risk, but if you don't perceive it, and then, again, in roughly the same time period, I think it was Hurricane Nathan went through Louisiana.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, just send everybody a postcard and say, look, it just hit your neighbor. You almost got hit. Next time it will be you, and take advantage of that, proximate risk to, hit people over the head with it.
Yeah. I always talk about Amanda Ripley's book, Unthinkable, where she said the leading cause of death in Hurricane Katrina was surviving Hurricane Camille in don't quote me on it, the 60s or something, because people survived, they were fine, and then Katrina hit, and then they found them in their attic. So we're just not thinking, we just got so much stuff going on during the day that it's like, this may or may not happen. My insurance agent wouldn't even sell me flood insurance. Said I didn't need it.
Who's that?
I'm fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. I just needed it for fun. But I think it's a gap in knowledge.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a gap in knowledge, but it's a gap in attention to what we already know. So.
Good. All right. So now it's your turn. So we're going to pivot. Let me see. I got to see if I can run the projector here. Is this the question I want? We'll just stick with this question. So we'll do about 5 or 10 minutes. I'll kind of read the room. But if you all take this question, what's your favorite or most actionable story of increasing community resilience, and what lessons can we apply to others? You might have to buddy up tables. Some of the tables are pretty small, but spend about 5 or 10 minutes talking with your table, and then we'll come back together. We've got mics here, and we'll ask people to share, share the stories. So maybe we'll spend about 5 or 10 minutes, discuss with the table and with your peers what a good example is, and then we'll spend another 5 or 10 minutes hearing from you all, and then we have another question that we'll go to next. So please take a few minutes and discuss this question and come prepared to share some of your best practices.